Top Game with your host, Sammy Castro. Episode 13. Marine Corps Detachment, Goodfellow Air Force Base Senior Enlisted Advisor, Master Gunnery Sergeant Kyle Cornett, a.k.a. Nuts. Admin note, Marines, get your hands on the MOC, get your hands on the FOE, get your hands on the National Defense Strategy. Some of these documents are several years old now, and I'm still running across Marines who haven't read them. If I lost you at MOC, ask your gunny where you can find these documents. Bonus points for getting your hands on classified versions. Now, if you have read them, make sure the Marines to your left and right have done so as well. The Commandant's professional reading list should not be your single source of professional reading. Disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed on Top Game are those of the producers or the guests appearing on the program and do not reflect the views and opinions of the Marine Corps or the Department of Defense. Thanks for tuning in.
Right?
Okay.
So these women, they see us pitching forward, they're like, what? So then they started getting into it. And they reached the point where they were like, they wanted to bet like $5 a quarter. My brother would pay for the quarter. They wanted to pitch like $5 a quarter. And like, I would walk into work, I swear it was like, they're like, Kai, pitch quarter, $5, right? Eventually, their husbands came in and complained to the manager about, hey, why is my wife not making all this money anymore? Because they were losing it all to me. So my brother, to this day, has this joke about how I was running a high-stakes gambling ring in high school. But yeah. How do you feel about the Scouts and the Mormon Church?
Split?
Yeah.
So, I'm okay with it on both ends.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with it on one end because freedom of religion, right?
Sure.
And their
Beliefs, yeah.
you know, exactly. And I mean, that's what we fight for.
Yeah.
And I'm also of the opinion that the Boy Scouts of America has a right to pivot. Sure. As an organization, right? Because before it wasn't about that, or at least not to the extent that it is now. And so I've run two separate units on Camp Courtney in Okinawa. One is Boy Scout Troop 110. Mm-hmm. I took over after a colleague of mine had to step down due to personal reasons. A lot of the kids in my troop are the sons of the 06 colonels, okay. Chiefs, assistant chiefs of staff, yeah. and whatnot. Or regimental commanders, right? Sure. So in that equation, Master Sergeant's probably got more downtime than they do.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have a support system like no other.
Yeah.
Hey, sir, I need a favor. Anything, Top. What do you need, right? And so, you know, in that aspect. I couldn't be more appreciative.
Sure.
And their spouses are phenomenal. Yeah, all in, right? Whatever you need, Sam. So that part is great. So outside of the troop, I also have a venture crew. Mm-hmm. Now I don't know if you're familiar with the venture crew. It's a co-ed program. Okay. Ages 14 to 20.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
So.
Is it Boy Scouts affiliated?
It's Boy Scouts of America affiliated. Mm-hmm. And it's been in existence for quite a few years. And I first ran across a venture crew here in San Angelo when I was doing a lot of volunteer work with the detachment and with the Concho Valley District Council. And when I saw what the program had to offer, I thought, man, that's phenomenal. If I had daughters, I would definitely want them to be part of that. You know, and not to knock, you know, Girl Scouts, it's a phenomenal program, but in the application of the program sometimes leaves a little bit to be desired. Sure. And with the Boy Scouts going to what they're calling a family scouting model, it makes sense because when I take the boys camping, in the time when we were here, and Enrique, my oldest, was the only one actively involved or of age to be involved in scouting officially, we were still all in as a family.
Yeah, sure.
So it was me as one of the volunteers, den leader or whatever, my wife, because she's got my youngest son, and then Enrique, doing his thing, going through advancement. And then on top of that, I bring in 20, 30, 40 of the Marine students to help out and volunteer and whatnot. And, but that was our whole weekend, or however long the camping event was going to be. And it was something we did completely as a family. It wasn't. Cool. It's not just a kid.
Yeah.
Right. And so I understand why they pivoted, because if I didn't have another young son wearing his Scout Buddy T-shirt and his Scout Buddy baseball cap, let me check and make sure that's not.
Go for it.
I think it is.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that's Sam Carter.
Is it?
Oh, you're the Valor Inn, right? I'm looking for your room. I just realized you said Angelo Inn. Duh. Yeah. We're here, homie. But if I had a daughter instead of a younger son waiting to kind of on ramp into the program, I'd feel like she was kind of left out.
Yeah, sure.
And honestly, the way that the program is set up and what it offers, I think is wholeheartedly what we need to be teaching all young children, the leadership skills that go along with it. And, not to get too much into the Scout law and the Scout oath, but effectively it's a paramilitary youth organization with traditional values, but with enough latitude for freedom of religion and respect for other cultures. And then the other part that I enjoy most about it is that it allows for a significant amount of variety. So the kid can there's certain required electives for advancement or required merit badges or you name it. And then the child is afforded the opportunity to then kind of branch off on their own.
Pursue their own interests.
Their own interests, So Vicente, he's all about robotics. He loves it. Was involved in the robotics program at several different schools, and has competed with the First Lego Robotics League. First Robotics Lego League, FRLL or something like that. I ended up getting a stipend when we were stationed in the Dominican Republic for them to get the Mindstorms educational system in the house. So we've got 2 core kits and then the expansion pack. Well, it just took one long weekend before they started like weaponizing robots, and we're having our own, in-house, BattleBots tournament. And I'm like, and then I see a ball bearing just like sling across the room towards my television. I'm like, stop! No more projectiles, right? Like, can we use a blowtorch? No,
a blowtorch. That's awesome.
But and to each his own. And if my youngest wants to get into game design, that's a merit badge. If my oldest wants to get into scuba diving, that's a merit badge. And it allows for that, right? But the main difference between, I think, the Boy Scout troop and the venture crew is that the venture crew is even more led by the youth.
Oh, really?
Than the Boy Scout one. So their motto is plan the adventure.
Okay.
So they run their whole team. They do the operational risk assessment worksheets.
Really?
I mean, you name it, logistics. I mean, S1, S2, and they do all of it.
Wow.
And as the adults, we're there as advisors. They elect their own their officers.
No shit.
So Enrique's the president for the crew currently, and he's also the senior patrol leader for the Boy Scouts. And I mean, it keeps him busy.
Is the
productively.
Is the Eagle Scout program still alive?
So the Eagle Scout program is still alive. So he took a couple of years off from scouting when we were in Texas, in San Antonio, and I regret it now, but not completely. But he's having to catch back up in order to get his Eagle Scout in time before he ages out. But there's an equivalent award in the venture crew program. It's called the Summit Award, but it doesn't necessarily have the same
weight,
notoriety as the Eagle Scout.
Gravitas.
Yeah, yes. So I mean, you'd have to constantly be saying. He said
you have to explain what it is.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's just a different program. But no, it's not.
Yeah.
If it's the same thing, it'd be called the same thing.
Yeah.
But more than anything, I've seen a level of maturity in character development, particularly in him, in his interaction with the leadership at the district level.
Sure.
I mean, they all know him.
Yeah.
And we recently had a situation where we walked into the scout hut, and we were kind of planning out some of the next events coming up with the council chairman, and he kind of threw out there, he's like, hey, if you know any certified lifeguards, we're going to need some for the scout camp coming up. And Enrique happens to be a certified lifeguard on base, and has gone through the first aid, CPR, the ADT, the all the training and whatnot. And it's no joke. It's a gut check. And I don't know if I could pass the physical requirements for the pool.
Rescue swims, all that stuff.
Enrique's a stronger swimmer than I am. But he's got a little bit more recent practice than I have. Yeah. But and I had asked him before Mr. Nicholson had asked him if he'd be interested in doing it. He said he didn't want to give up his entire spring break to do that.
Oh yeah.
And I can understand that.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to force him. But suffice to say that when Mr. Nicholson asked him face to face, Enrique didn't feel like he could say no.
Oh, really?
Because there was a requirement. He had a low density skill set.
Sure.
It was up to him to step up to the challenge, and he did.
Oh, wow.
And so we dropped him off the day before it started, and then we came back later to drop his brother off, and he's got sticks of 5 kids laid out, right?
Right.
And so him and the other lifeguards are there.
He's pushing recruits.
Yeah, and so he's like, all right, next stick, come out, and he tells his brother, Vicente, you get into that stick right there. Yeah. You guys are next, and so my wife and I are just sitting there, just kind of watching from afar. Once they get to that point, we're not involved anymore. Yeah. And so Enrique goes out. He's got a kayak, and the kids kind of have to walk out about 100 meters, and then they got to swim another 50 to get to the first buoy. They've got to swim back and forth 4 times. And then when they get back from the fourth trip, then they've got to tread water for I think it was like 5 minutes, and then they'll get one of 3 ratings: either swimmer, non-swimmer, or and advanced swimmer. I think was the third one. So when Vicente goes out there, and I'm mindful that he's not as strong a swimmer as his older brother is. So my father, protective instinct starts kicking. It's like, I wonder if he's going to be all right. And sure enough, when he's on his way out there, he hadn't even gotten to the part where he's swimming back and forth. He can't walk any further. He's still swimming out to the starting point, and it's not in the pool. Yeah. They're in Okinawa water. Yeah. And he waves down to the lifeguards to include his brother. His brother paddles over, pulls him into the kayak. They talk. I can't hear or see what they're saying exactly, and then he just kind of roughly pushes his brother back in the water and goes back to his observation point and makes Vicente come out to his point. Yeah. They start. He does his thing. When he comes back in, Vicente's got just blood just draining down his knee, and I'm like, what happened? And he said, I scraped myself on the way going out, but I told Enrique I didn't want to come back and fail. I figured I'd just tough it out. I'm thinking to myself, man, that's a perfect way to attract sharks.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
But then Enrique comes in and I said, did he pass? Did he really pass? He says, yeah, Dad. I wouldn't go easy on him. Yeah. If anything, I'm going to go harder.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was just one of those things where you kind of start to see their character develop, sure. and they're put in situations where
you watch them become young men.
Yeah, and that's what I've liked about the program.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why I'm so glad that it's starting to open up to young ladies.
Yeah.
And I've got a few that are part of the venture crew, and a couple of others that are eyeballing the Boy Scout troop when it becomes available. But the problem that I'm starting to see is for the low density or lower population facilities that we have on Okinawa, I may not have enough girls to have my own separate patrol. Right. So what do I do in that situation? So there's always been a lone scout program, but if I've got a troop, why would I have to make her a lone scout? Because so it's integrated, but it's not. They've had to make some. They've had to make some concessions. I think because of some of the sensitivities.
Yeah. Right.
But we'll see how it plays out.
That's cool.
But I mean, we're as a family, we've been committed to Scouts for quite a few years.
That's cool.
But were you ever in the Scouts or anything when you were growing up?
So I got kicked out of the Cub Scouts when I was little.
Kicked out?
Yeah, I mean it was. You want to put on?
Yeah, you can just do. I'm just doing a sound check right now.
Okay. Yeah, I don't even remember what it was now. But like when I was a little kid, if I remember right, there was we were doing something. We were having to like grow a tomato plant or something, and some kid, like on purpose, broke my tomato plant. And I was like, I was like, hey motherfucker! I didn't say motherfucker.
But you were thinking it.
Yeah. But I was like, hey man, what are you doing? He's like, I don't even know what he said. He made some kind of smart ass remark or whatever. So I took his plant and I was like, boom, threw it on the ground, and it all came out of the pot or whatever. And the scout leader saw it and started kind of, I wasn't chewing my ass, I guess. But he's like, what are you doing? Like, we don't do that. And I was like, yeah, but he just literally broke mine. He's like, well, short version is he didn't like my attitude. So, but which is unusual actually, because as a kid, I was probably more deferential to, at that point, I was probably more deferential to authority than is healthy, maybe. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So I'm not. There maybe I was just too young to realize that there was another dynamic going on that I wasn't aware of.
Right.
But so anyways, I was no longer in Scouts after that, which is too bad because I enjoy that kind of stuff.
So that lesson came to me at a young age when we were at a friend's house. My mom was in class, going to school full time, and so my dad had me and my brother. After one of my brother's little league games, a friend of my mom and dad's invited us over for dinner.
Yeah.
She was a single mom, but she was dating a good friend of my dad's. But she knew my mom. It wasn't awkward or anything like that. And so she had two sons, me and my brother, her and my father. And later on, her boyfriend, my dad's friend, showed up. And he and my dad, they go way back.
Yeah.
Well, I'm there at the in the kids' bedroom, me and the other boys, and I must have been playing Nintendo or something. And my brother and the two other kids who were younger than me, I was the oldest in that situation. They were jumping on the bed, and one of the kids fell down and hurt himself, broke his arm. So the hostess grabs her son, takes him to the hospital, and leaves my dad and his buddy there. And then he starts to grill me. He's like, "What'd you do?" I said, I didn't do anything. I was just sitting there playing video games.
Yeah.
Mega Man. Mega Man 2.
Right.
And he's like, no. I know you did something. Tell me what you did. And I said, I didn't do anything. And I'm kind of looking at my dad, and
right.
My dad said, you look him in the eye and you tell him the truth. And so I did. And the lesson was, you need to stand up for yourself, and if that's, being defiant to someone who's accusing you of something, then that's the requirement. And so then my father said, now you heard the truth from my son. Now you deal with me.
Yeah.
And so, you know.
Yeah, that's
okay.
perfect.
Yeah. And so I've kind of passed that along when appropriate to my boys.
Yeah.
But, you know, but that kind of, it ties into some of the things that you learn coming up as a junior Marine, where you start to be differential to your sergeants, you know, as a junior Marine, and then maybe as a sergeant to your junior officers, right? But what happens if they're wrong? How do you deal with those situations?
That's a good question. It's funny. So on your previous guests, many of them have mentioned Joe Black, right?
Yes, they have.
So so I was a Lance Corporal. I was at 2nd Radio Battalion. I was still in the RIP, so not yet a member of RRP. I think I had duty or something, right? I was a duty driver or something like that. And Joe overheard me telling the story about something stupid that the duty was trying to make me do the night before.
What rank was he at the time?
Joe Black? He was a staff sergeant.
Okay.
Right. So I was talking to the other guys in the RIP class, and I was like, essentially, I was a young man who was talking a bunch of shit. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, I told that sergeant what I was not going to do. You know, kind of that kind of thing. And Joe looks at me. He's like, you know, you're a special kind of stupid. And when he said it, I was like,
yeah, I am.
It's like yeah, I can get down with that. But to answer your question, though, one of the things that I have learned over the years, you can, and this is outside of the cliche of you can tell anybody anything as long as you do it with tact, right? So there's a certain element of that's true, but I have learned most of all to avoid the emotional argument, right? So if you're someone senior to you is wrong, and you can demonstrate that they are wrong factually, more often than not, you're probably going to get ultimately in the long run, what you want, or you're going to try to, influence things in the right direction. And there are exceptions, obviously, right? So like one of the things I found, even with the most difficult leaders that I've had, to include people that I would actually consider to be stupid, even if they didn't agree with me on the spot, they probably they would allow enough time to pass so that whatever argument had happened, had faded, and then they would later on come out as if something was their own idea, like, all right, this is what we're going to do, like that kind of thing. Right. And whatever, let them have their day. But there's an element of sticking up for yourself, and for example, like if you're a young team leader or something, right? There's an element of sticking up for yourself and sticking up for your team that is useful, but only up to a point, right? So if you, matter of fact, here's a good story for you. So I was on the 24th MU. It was like 2001 actually, because 9/11 happened on that float, and my team leader, our det staff in CIC. I actually believe he was medically bipolar, right? I don't mean like he was just kind of a jerk. Right. I actually think he was bipolar. So we're in the CES one day, and it was we were in Rota. We had Cinderella Liberty the night before, and it's like 5 a.m, and like people are getting pulled out of their racks. Everybody's got to go to the CES, that kind of thing. And he pulls everybody up there, and he's like, screaming and yelling about how people weren't accounted for. And the guy who was on duty the night prior is standing there going, "Hey, Gunny, everybody's here. I checked everybody in." Like, one of those things. Like, right. Like he was factually incorrect, right? So my team leader, eventually, Sergeant, lost it, snapped. And he like charges across the room, and he's trying to like grab him, jack him up against the wall, like, you motherfucker, like that kind of thing. And in the moment, everyone's like, "Oh yeah." And then like 5 minutes after the moment, you're like, "Oh shit." Because he has lost any sort of moral authority, right, to defend you from because he's on thin ice, right? So by all rights, he probably should have been fired right then, because you can't do that. You can't physically assault a gunny when you're a sergeant, right? So, and I was the ATL on that team. So functionally, I had to serve in a lot of the roles and responsibilities of a team leader on that float, because our actual team leader had, gotten himself in trouble and was on the hot seat.
Right.
So he knew that he had to walk a very fine line from then on, So you can take it too far. The standing up for yourself and your Marines, you can take it too far. You have to figure out, whoever it is that you're dealing with, you have to figure out what their line is, probing actions. You know what I mean?
Right. So I 2008, I took out UDET as the staff and COIC, and a young sergeant by the name of Buckminster was on my RRT, and he got caught by the MU sergeant major with his sleeves flipped up.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he.
Go figure, RT guy with the sleeves quarter cocked.
Yeah. I don't know if he knows to this day how much mat time I had to get with that sergeant major to get him through that, because he wanted to have him outside the DFAC, correcting everybody with the implication that if the sergeant major walks through and he sees any uniform infractions whatsoever, he's going to come down like the wrath of heaven on the young sergeant. But me and the relationship with the 2 chief at the time was Mike Smith, became strained over this incident, and then by extension, I went straight to the sergeant major against Mike Smith's advice and counsel, but I wasn't going to just. I couldn't do nothing.
Sure.
And so I go up and I catch him. He's sitting inside the COC, and I say, Sergeant Major, you got a second? He goes, I do, Staff Sergeant. And I said, I wanted to talk to you about Sergeant Buckminster. He says, one of the recon guys, the radio reconnaissance guys. He says, I'm glad you brought this up, and now you have my undivided attention. And man, we went at it. And I pointed out the situation and the way in which I saw it, and the way in which the Buckminster perceived it. Just kind of advocated for him, and we went back and forth, and eventually he relented. But one of the things that was noted in the aftermath of that was I will stand up for my Marines. I wasn't just going to roll over. And as a young staff sergeant on a MU, fighting against lions like that, it was daunting. And there's a couple of times where I was like, man, it'd just be easy just to roll over. Yeah. But that's not me. Yeah. That's not what I'm about, and that's not what these Marines deserve. Because some of the best senior staff and COs that I'd ever had an opportunity to work amongst were the ones that put me in that billet. Yeah. And I didn't want to let them down either. But now I have Master Gunnery Sergeant Kyle Cornett here in front of me.
Fact.
How's that feel?
It's interesting. I don't know how it feels yet, because I got frocked the Friday. I got frocked on Friday. I got on a plane on Sunday to fly out here. So I don't know. I think it won't be real to me until I'm back around my Marines. You know what I mean?
So I've never seen a frocking ceremony. Is it just like a promotion?
It is. There's one exception, and that is when they read your warrant and I appoint you, whatever they say, I appoint you Master Gunnery Sergeant, frocked.
Okay.
Everything else is the same.
All right.
Yeah.
So how many years to get to Master Guns?
21. 21, but I took a P, my first look at Master Sergeant. Yeah.
How'd that feel?
Oh, it hurt. It stung. As a matter of fact, so Sean Nakow and I were both at Pendleton. We were both on the same board. We went to the advanced course together. And when the list came out, I was like, what the fuck? So having then subsequent, I called you. Actually, the first person I called was Joe Black. I was like, Joe, take a look at my stuff. Tell me what's going on, right? So it turns out that the reason that I took a P was I had a date gap.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, but it was the shadiest kind of date gap. So had come back from deployment, and my RS not long after the deployment had PCS'd. And I knew that he owed a fit rep, and I'd been contacting him for like 6 months leading up to the board. And he was, working on it. And I was checking APES as well. And I saw that he had, I don't remember how long before, but not too long before the board, I saw in APES that he had submitted my fit rep. And so at that point I was like, oh, okay, RO's got it, right? And I contacted the RO to make sure. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm tracking. But the RO didn't submit the fit rep. And I don't remember exactly when it actually hit the system, if it was midway through the board or after the board or what it was. But oh man, that stung. That was a shot to the pride, let me tell you. But got selected the next year, and carried on.
So I had a date gap just before the drop dead date for the Master Sergeant Board, and I was in the last class for the advanced course.
So shot of the eye.
So, I mean, yeah, that's probably, PME has always been my weakness.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I have a very interesting relationship with PME. I went to the sergeant resident course. I didn't do the corporal's course. I went to the sergeant residence course, and I hated it to the point where my course critique, I got called into the master guns office to defend my course critique. Then I did not do the career course resident, because back then it wasn't a requirement. I did the non-res, and then after that I did the advanced course, and then obviously I did the E8 seminar. But then I did like 3 different PMEs in about a year and a half time. So I did the Joint SOF Senior Enlisted Academy, I did the Army Sergeant Major Academy, and I did Marine Corps SEPME.
Damn.
And then whatever, the Senior Enlisted Joint PME 2, the online one.
The Sedge PME, yeah.
Yeah. So you have stumbled upon one of those topics that I am very passionate and frustrated about. The GSOFC was very interesting, right? So go ahead.
You think this was an accident?
No, I don't. I was giving you some props there. GSOFC was very interesting because they have the joint factor down, right? SOCOM is an inherently joint organization. They are very clearly, with their curriculum, purpose building guys to put in strategic billets, right, around the COCOMs.
As they should.
Yeah, absolutely. The Army Sergeant Major Academy, they are purpose building sergeants major to fill strategic joint billets, right? The Marine Corps was very down and in focused. What are our Lance Corporals doing? What are our NCOs doing? That kind of thing.
Right.
And that's frustrating to me because previous SOCOM Sergeant Major Ferris, or CSM Ferris, I should say, he wrote a white paper that's talking about early to know. So the concept, what he describes is essentially, hey.
Say it again, early to
know. So the whole idea is that our E6s and E7s, they need to be exposed to many of the things that don't get addressed in service PME until you're an E8 or an E9. And he's right. Just this weekend, or this last week and a half in the TNR working groups, how many conversations have we had where we've had to explain some quirk of the way that the system works, or something like that, and in some cases to RE8s and 9s, right? And it's not their fault. You know what I mean? Like anything else in life, you don't know something until someone tells you, right? Especially when there's the vagaries of our bureaucratic DoD system, right?
Right.
I I told John and Sam, I was like, it'd be really awesome if you guys, if there's one already existing, to publish it, but if not, to build one, just something that shows all those shops at headquarters of the Marine Corps and how they interact with each other, so that, if a guy at a unit has an idea, they can know how to pursue the idea.
Like Schoolhouse Rock for how a bill becomes a law.
As a matter, I used that phrase. I used that phrase with John. I was like, yeah, man, we need the Marine Corps version of how a bill becomes a law, right?
Yeah.
It includes, and Chief Warrant Officer 5 Mush mentioned it, the Defense Acquisition University and some of that stuff. There are so many aspects of what we do on a regular basis that are not addressed in any way, either through Service PME or through our MOS roadmap. So actually, last week when we were at, what was that place called, with the giant Jenga, Fiddle Strings. So Chief Warrant Officer Mush and I were sitting down talking, and he was describing to me like the unusual path that his career took, right? And so his experiences, so obviously you see him now, right? And we forget sometimes that he wasn't just born that way. His Marine Corps experiences built that. And I don't know that we do a very good job, and maybe part of it's, with the reduced number of duty stations that SIG gunners can go to now, like, Scotland isn't there anymore, Broder's not there anymore, Mammoth Hill's gone, like all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
But all those places that he went, he took something from each one of those spots that exposed him to a different aspect of SIGINT, a different aspect of the Marine Corps, SysCom and how they function, and acquisitions and how they function, and then McKISS and I Department and all these things. And so why would we not want our staff sergeants to know this stuff?
That's a good question. I don't think that we don't want them to know. I just don't think that we're set up to transfer that understanding, that those KSAs, if you will, in a timely fashion. And so what I think we end up with is a smattering, a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
You have some guys that get exposed to things and by chance or circumstance. There's some guys that are just aware that there's a deeper game out there and they look for it. They may get mentored, get that one solid mentor. Sonny was talking about how Joe Black snatched him up, pulled him close, and said, "You're gonna learn policy now, motherfucker."
Yeah.
And he did.
Oh yeah.
To his dismay, right? But now he's better for it. The Marines that he touches and interacts with, they're better for it.
Yeah, right.
And so in a certain light, it's disappointing, because whereas we talk about the cognitive load that's going to be placed upon these young Marines, but we're not set up or prepared to prepare them for it.
Yeah.
And if we as an organization truly believe that the Marine is our single greatest strength, our single greatest asset, then why are we not dedicating those resources to that asset?
Yeah.
And I made the point again today, and every time I see it, I call it out, in hopes that it'll be the last time I call it out, and that
right.
we continue to obfuscate the situation with the mindset that we need to man the equipment, vice equip the man, and I mean woman too, the Marine, but we make that mistake over and over and over again, and it was what I always thought that we did better than anyone else, was that we equipped the man, and not the other way around. But when I see instances where that's not the case, it just sits raw with me.
Oh yeah.
But to your point about PME, it's funny that you brought that up, because just like last night, I got in, and on Reddit, somebody pinged me out on my username Top Game Podcast, because somebody one of the Marines asked the question: how does being above zone work when you've never been in zone?
Oh yeah. So
let me finish his question. Sure. I was below 2 years ago, and the MOS was closed last year. This year I'm above zone. Am I just briefed as in zone, Are there any details that I'm overlooking? And there was a whole conversation that took place, but suffice to say that the guy that called me out says, I can't help you out with everything you've asked, but I'll give you what I can. And I'm also going to randomly page Top Game Podcast and any other senior enlisted who may frequent here, because it feels appropriate since your senior enlisted have abdicated their responsibility here. Because this is what the Marine says. I have all these questions, but I'd like to ask more pointed questions, and I'd rather not waste anyone's time or energy on Reddit with this stuff. I'm just a little bit disoriented right now, and one of the questions that I have is, for the last 3 years, I've been planning to execute a lap move that just didn't go through. During that time, I was not allowed to go to sergeant's course, and I'm trying to get into my course next week. What options do I have? Can I go to sergeant's course as a current class 3 dental? Can I go on light duty because I'm having surgery next week? Shit like that. That was those series of questions that you need a senior leader right there to kind of take you from step to step. What are some of the things that the board looks for? Where is the presentation of who was selected last year? How can you be in the above zone without ever being in the zone? Yeah. Shit like that. After I get a better grasp, I'm going to come over my OMPF and master brief sheet. I really don't know how to read my master brief sheet, but I'm going to give it a try. I'm also trying to help other sergeants who have questions and no one knows or is speaking up. And he says, I was told by both my gunnery sergeant, first sergeant, and sergeant major to figure it out because you're a sergeant. I have more pressing matters to deal with.
Oof.
And
that's a gut shot.
Right. So not having all the information, right? Because the senior enlisted may not have exactly said it that way, but if you're taking the Marine at his word, on an internet forum where he's anonymous, what motivation does he have to lie? But he's definitely interested in getting promoted. How does that apply?
So before I answer the question, I want to point something out. So even though I just talked about the differences in PME, I will say this, that for all of the E7s or soon to be E8s, all that kind of stuff, I absolutely 100% encourage going to SEPME, because it is without doubt by far leaps and bounds the best Marine Corps PME I've attended. So actually a lot of those questions he asks are addressed in SEPME. So my guess is that when he took he did not. My guess is that he probably took a P. Now, the most likely explanation is that when he thought he was in the below zone, that the board dates adjusted during the board, and he ended up in zone and took a P, especially if he wasn't PME complete, right?
Right.
And that happens all the time. As a matter of fact, so most Marines probably don't know this, but there is one person in Headquarters Marine Corps who determines zone dates, right? One guy. Right now, the OccFld sponsors, the monitors, they feed information to this guy, but there's one guy who determines that. So my guess is the most likely explanation is that he actually did take a P. Now, if he legitimately was in the below zone, what he needs to do is, for starters, go back and read the message from that board, because they will post what the final zone dates were in that message. And if he goes back and looks, and he legitimately was still in the below zone, and then was closed, and then now is in the above zone. So here is how above zone briefings work. You are not briefed as being in the above zone. So when the board conducts their brief, for starters, I encourage everyone to go to the promotions branch webpage and watch those videos, right? You know the ones I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yeah. So watch those videos.
So I pointed him to that section of manpower.
Yeah.
In a later response.
Yeah. So those, the only problem with those videos is that currently they're briefing all water walkers, all sixes, right? And they've gotten a lot of feedback about, hey, why don't you brief someone who has adversity, or show a brief that has, that's like a 4 or a 5 or something like that. And I think that they're actually in the process of making those videos now. So hopefully they'll get posted soon. But yeah, now his questions about PME, like, can he go on light duty? So every PME, they have a lot of latitude to to admit folks into PME, light duty, limited duty. It depends, right? So his command, this is a sergeant. Yes.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. So his command, if they talk to the local Staff and SEAL Academy and say, hey, listen, this Marine is whatever, light duty, limited duty, whatever it might be. However, he's approaching the board, yada yada. They can make exceptions, and they will, and they have made exceptions to allow Marines to attend PME on. I know they do it on limited duty. I would imagine that they do it on light duty as well, because again, the academy itself has latitude to make, decisions like that. And then what was I don't remember what the other question was. Attend as a dental class 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I don't know that one. I mean, that one's off my radar. I don't typically track what is and is not allowed for dental readiness.
I think what he was kind of getting at was he was going to have to get surgery and then would have to be on light duty because of the surgery. And so,
well, I would say this, depending on what I might. Okay, so I've had a couple of surgeries in my career. I would say this: if you're going to have surgery, especially like oral surgery, high likelihood that you should actually be on limited duty, mostly because limited duty exists to protect the Marine, right? Guys don't think about it like that. They think, oh, well, especially with the new 12 months or you're out policy, right? They're thinking, oh man, I don't want that. Well, you do actually want that because it is there to protect you. But assuming that he's right and it's limited duty and light duty and not limited duty, that plays into my previous answer about the academy having flexibility to do kind of some things that they want. But to address, I think what is the larger point there of his command is not helping him out. So you're right. I mean, we have no contextual data to suggest whether he's, giving the 100% truth or not. I would be willing to bet that even if his story is not 100% accurate, there's a Marine out there somewhere who has a story that just like that is accurate. And there is an element of figured out, that's real. I'm not going to go down the message to Garcia route because I don't buy that, right? But
there's some Kool-Aid you won't drink.
Well, look, that particular book makes a point, right? In today's day and age, the just figure it out thing. There are some complexities that didn't exist when that book was written.
Most definitely.
Yeah. So we also have an obligation to the Marines to train them, right? So the discussions today about the 51s, right? So are we going to just have them show up and all right, you're now in charge of the Intel data architecture integration? Go for it.
Get some.
Yeah, come on. It's like that's just silly, right?
Did you see the look on their faces when I suggested that they get proficiency pay for computer languages?
Oh yeah. Like
I wasn't playing to the crowd, but I think that they were surprised to hear that come out of a 91's mouth.
Oh yeah, they got super excited. Somebody's shit a negro. You know what I mean? They were excited. So I guess my point with that is, look, if your command is for real doing things like that, my advice to you is call your monitor and request orders. I say that half jokingly. There has to be someone. There's got to be someone in that chain of command.
Right.
You might have to ask around a little bit. You might have to go to a different platoon or a different company or something like that. But there's someone in that chain of command who knows how to answer your question and is willing.
So what I told the Marine to do on the subreddit USMC was to shoot me a DM with his information, and I was going to link him up with somebody. No, I mean, it's how small is the Marine Corps, right? And there's somebody somewhere within the vicinity of him, particularly if he's at one of the larger bases, that I could link him up with to get him some one-on-one mentoring outside of his chain of command. The other thing that I mentioned was the OccFld specialists. It's at least ours are open to doing career mentoring, and then there's the actual enlisted career mentors.
The career counselors?
Yes.
In the Headquarters Marine Corps? Yeah.
Exactly.
They're underutilized.
I think so.
Yeah.
I used them. They made us use them when I was at the advanced course at Quantico.
Yeah.
But I think probably the greatest advantage of being at Quantico is I was able to go in through my OMPF and get everything covered and aligned exactly the way it needed to be.
When did you go?
It was 2015, 2016.
Was it a female gunny that ran OMPF?
I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, you're 100% right. You know what? Matter of fact, I got a story for you about. So when I was at SETME in Quantico, there was something in my record I was trying to fix. Right. So if you get an award, there's 4 parts of the award that need to be in your book. Right. So there's the award itself. There's the citation, the summary of action, and the NAVMAC. Right. So I went into I found out like the actual desk of the guy I had to go talk to. And I walked in and I was like, hey, I explained what was going on, like, parts of this, like I think it was the NAVMAC and the summary of action that were missing. I was like, hey, what do I need to do to get this fixed? He's like, oh, you got copies? I was like, yeah, hang on a second, let me go make a copy. So I go like right down the hall and make a copy. I come back. I was like, here you go. He goes, okay, you're good. I was like, wait, I'm good? Like I can walk away.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, man, you're good. This is I think it was a staff sergeant, I think. I was like, okay, so I'm gonna leave the room now, and this is gonna get fixed. And he's looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, he's like, yeah, man, you're good. So I was like, okay, let me ask you a question. I was like, if I was not physically on Quantico, would it have been that easy? He's like, oh no, it's not that easy. I was like, okay, so tell me how. So now when I go back to my unit, what do I tell my Marines? How do they do this? Right? Have this simple of an interaction? He goes, well, just have them email me. I was like, that's it, just email you. And he's like, yeah. I'm thinking, why do people not know this stuff? You know what I mean? And obviously, if you're physically on Quantico, it gets a lot easier because you have face-to-face access. But man, it's one of those moments where you're like, man, what is going on right now?
Why do we make it so hard on ourselves?
Yeah, why do we make it so hard on ourselves? I mean, I'm sure an element of that is just, I would actually probably say that there's probably somebody in that shop who's going, we tell everybody, this is how you do it. Nobody does it right, like that kind of thing.
Right.
Actually, so speaking of the OMPF thing, so that same trip, I also went into the OMPF to like fix some things. One of the things I did was have them, remember back in the day when you had to put your social on everything?
Yeah.
So they'll take your social off, right? So when I was talking to the gunny who's in charge of OMPF, I was like, why is this so difficult? Like I can log on to MOL today, submit a leave request, have my leave request approved, execute leave, sign myself in from leave, and it will automatically adjust my leave balance. Why is there not an MOL module where I can submit something for my OMPF through MOL and have it just automatically added? So she explained to me the whole process for how that works. So when you have, like, let's say whatever, you got a certificate from advanced course, right? And you want to submit it to be added to your OMPF. You send the email with the attachment. Now pretend that you don't put your EIPI like on the cert, right? So that email shows up. It's somebody in that office's desk, and they drag the attachment over to a server and drop it, right? The email itself gets deleted. Okay.
Of course it does.
So now that server is accessed by people in a physically different office. So when they open that document up, if your name isn't like readily identifiable in the GAL, they have no way to contact you.
Oh.
They have no way to contact you and say, hey.
I see, says the blind man.
Yeah, right. So they have no way to contact you. So it just sits there and eventually, gets archived or deleted or whatever, right? And I'm looking at her like, it is 2000. Well, so there's last year. Like it is 2017. This is what we're doing. It's like, oh my God, man, what the hell?
So a little bit earlier today, I reached out to some of our colleagues, some of them who know you very well.
Oh, good.
And asked them, just crowdsource some questions for Kyle Cornett. And one of the questions that I have is from a good friend of yours by the name of Kevin Simmons.
Mm.
He's asking about your observations on the importance of your new billet.
The one I'm about to fill?
The one you're about to fill.
Yeah.
Which is
So I'm about to be the senior enlisted advisor for Goodfellow for the M1 schools. So interestingly,
It's a 3-part question, but I'll let you answer this one first.
okay. So this is how fucked up I am, right? And this is probably true for most of us. So this past Sunday was Mother's Day, right?
Yep.
So I am sitting in my hotel room. I spent like all day driving around with a realtor, looking at houses, all that kind of stuff. And I'm back in my hotel room, and I'm texting with Scoggins at like 10 o'clock at night. So 11 o'clock East Coast time, right? Or maybe it was 10 o'clock East Coast time and 9 o'clock here. I don't remember. And I'm asking him about how we can institutionally incentivize Marines to come here to be instructors. And at some point, I'll show you the text string. At one point, I was like, "Oh shit, it's Mother's Day, dude! Stop talking to me, man. Like, go be with your woman, right?" So like my brain doesn't always switch off that way, right?
Right.
So having, but the context of the discussion is what I was getting at. And I had the same discussion with Sam Carter tonight out at dinner. And okay, so I fully believe that the Marines that we send to be instructors, if it doesn't hurt giving them up, then we're doing it wrong, right? So when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, so obviously the first Marine leaders that our young Marines see are they're boot camp drill instructors, right? And then they got whoever they get at MCT, whatever. But then post MCT, you got these young Marines who are coming to school, and they don't know anything about the Marine Corps. They've been there for like 5 minutes, right? They know boot camp and that's it. So if we are not investing the absolute best and brightest into this duty station, into these billets, so it's a crapshoot, right? You're running the gamut. You could absolutely by accident, and saying by accident is not entirely fair, because obviously the monitor does a great job of trying to screen Marines to come here, right? But you could by accident have somebody who does absolutely great things. They're knocking it out of the park. But if you have one guy on the opposite, or one Marine on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have the potential to poison a generation of Marines in a particular MOS, right? And if they happen to be
especially if that one Marine is in a critical billet.
Yeah, and if they happen to be, so like, let's just pick Russian for a second, right? So if it's a Russian instructor, at least in that case, they're only poisoning the small number of Russian students that go through there, comparatively to the rest of the OccFld, right? But if they're a TSOC instructor, they could potentially poison the whole OccFld. Now, keep in mind, I am not suggesting that the current Goodfellow instructors are poisoning people. That's not what I mean, right? But that is in my mind, that is the gravitas that
That's the risk.
Yeah, that's the risk, exactly, right? So that's the thought that I have behind this. I fully understand that what happens here is the formative initial moment. Because I think back to when I was in A school, right? In the Marine, the instructors that we had back there. Matter of fact, we had examples of both the Marine that you want to emulate and the cancer, right? So, and as a matter of fact, I think Kevin Simmons mentioned a lot of them. So John Scott was there, Dave Bauer was there, Ben Neal was there, and then we had Staff Sergeant, actually got promoted to Gunny, Pulling. Actually, you might want to edit that. I should mention his name. We had a Marine who was court-martialed for having sex with a student in his office, right? So,
Ouch.
So he went away and comes back to the det at Fort Huachuca. He left as a gunny. He comes back as a private, lance corporal, whatever it was. I mean, think about how awkward that is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's there. My point is that there is potential. Like one of the things I brought up to Sam today, and Sam and John, was, just spitballing ideas. Like, what if we, as an OccFld, conducted the equivalent of the officer command slate for instructor billets? Like, we sit down, board everybody. You know what I mean? Say, all right, these Marines, we've got X number of billets coming open for these schools. Conduct a slate. You know what I mean? And to be fair, to the monitor, Willie does a very, very good job of finding those Marines. He also has had to assign a number of RA3 Oscar codes for Marines who don't want to execute those orders. So that leads to incentivizing it. And I think we're still trying to think through how to do that. But But to answer Kevin's initial question, I'm very conscious. I'm very conscious of the implications of fucking this up. You know.
So my cohort of instructors here at Goodfellow, 2008 to 2012 timeframe, included guys like Chris Taylor, Zach Ensminger, Nick Watson, Liam Stockton, Craig Kasipe. I had Adam Slaughter.
Adam just took over for me.
We had Jeff Grand. I mean, just a good crew, and that crew were the ones that were selected by Joe Black, and then later Crawdaddy. But I mean, when in the instances where we had those that poisoned the well, I think we did a pretty good job of cleaning that up internally. Wasn't completely foolproof.
Sure.
Execution or
Nothing informal ever is.
But
Or formal for that matter.
but we did our best.
Yeah.
What would, this is part two, what would be your ideal roadmap for the development of a 2691?
Oh, of a 91. That's a good question. So some of this, so there's really two parts to it, right? So there's the technical side of our MOS, and then there's the, what I will loosely refer to as the leadership aspects, right? So first, I'll stick with the leadership side first, right? So you could very easily make the argument, all those things I talked about a minute ago that folks should know, like, policy, how headquarters Marine Corps works, acquisitions. I mean, that's pretty much true for any OccFld, right? I don't know, maybe there's a rare exception in there, but I think that's pretty much true for any OccFld. So for the leadership development side of things, although let me caveat that for a second. So obviously there's clearly unique things to us, dealing with NSA and all that kind of stuff. That's same concept, different application, right? For the leadership side, I mean, obviously what you want to see is you want to see a Marine, seeking out opportunities to lead, right? Whether it's their being a team leader, whatever it might be, right? You want to see them seek that. For one thing, even if their skills as a leader are not yet fully developed, what they're demonstrating is the desire and the initiative. When I see those kinds of things, what I know is that this is someone who is going to pursue excellence on their own without me having to tell them, right? So it's an indicator.
They're intrinsically motivated.
Yeah, that's right. It's not the only indicator, but it is an indicator, right? So with that in mind, exposure to a variety of leadership positions at various echelons, because let's be honest, you're going to learn different things as a platoon sergeant than you did as a team leader. You're going to learn different things as a company senior enlisted than you did as a platoon sergeant. The leadership billets themselves, by virtue of being in them, is going to be an education in and of itself, right? In terms of the technical side, so I've had this discussion with a number of Marines over the years. Sometimes there are arguments, sometimes it's venting, sometimes it's commiserating, and sometimes it's an attempt to generate ideas. So, and this might be an unfair statement, but I think that we have a generation of staff NCOs where their technical proficiencies are very inconsistent, right? So obviously we have some rock stars, right? We've got some Marines who are just crushing it, and we have others who are not. And without getting into the pop psychology of it all, some of these Marines, it is clear that somewhere along the way, either through observation or direct, someone told them this, that hey, it's Staff Sergeant, you no longer need to maintain your proficiencies because you're a supervisor now, right? And that's horseshit. So the example I would give you is, if you are the guy who believes, hey, I don't need to maintain my proficiencies, and now you're a staff sergeant, you're a platoon sergeant, det chief, whatever, and you're you're supervising training for your whatever element that you're in charge of, how exactly are you verifying whether your Marines are proficient if you're not yourself? If you don't know that, then how can you evaluate them? How can you not only evaluate them, but how can you give your team leaders or whoever advice on how to improve their proficiencies? You know what I mean? And that applies to any skill, collection, analysis, comp, doesn't matter, right?
Right.
If you are not proficient yourself, and you know who would be great people to talk to about this? Talk to the Marines who have, like, for example, like you, right? So you spent some time in the DR, right? Outside of the OccFld. I mean, not entirely outside the OccFld, but outside the OccFld, right?
Right. Yeah, it was a human.
Yeah.
Billet.
Yeah. So those guys who
Or
are
admin, but yeah.
Yeah. So those guys who are removed from the OccFld for a period of time, they when they come back, whether it's the B billet, whatever, doesn't matter, right? They come back. Ask them how they feel in terms of, like, has the world passed them by? You know what I mean? And I guarantee you that in some capacity, they're going to feel like, holy shit, these young Marines know more than I do about what's going on right now. You know, and where you'll see the ones who shine are the ones who recognize, oh shit, I need to step up my game, and then they step up their game.
Right. So one of the things that I was able to execute upon returning back to the field, it wasn't the fleet, but it was at MCSB Company H, was in the same way I figured out which lance corporals I needed to lean on.
Yeah.
As a gunny, I figured out which sergeants and corporals I needed to lean on.
Yeah.
Or senior airmen, or whatever the case may be, because I had you know, all shapes and sizes and flavors underneath the flavors of the rainbow in San Antonio. But once I've identified those individuals, I latched close to them and I had them teach me and everything that they knew, asked them all kinds of questions, and they made me smarter.
Yeah.
And having that humility and the ability to learn from your subordinates was a skill that I picked up as a sergeant, and I've never forgotten that.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times our peer group can be under the perception that to ask a question of a subordinate demonstrates weakness,
Right.
and undermines or erodes your credibility. But you know what I think my subordinates saw, particularly there in San Antonio, was here we've got a leader,
Yeah.
right, who's willing to get out front and kind of shelter us from the winds and storms that can kind of come their way.
Sure.
And they wanted to set me up for success as best they could. And they did just that. And so it allowed me to kind of catch up to speed. But once I got up and running, we were off to the races, and
Yeah.
we were able to do some pretty great things just based off of that initial onboarding process and their willingness to kind of help bring me up.
Yeah. Well,
right?
Yeah, and so to get back to the original question, so I would say that filling a wide variety of billets, you know what I mean? So ask the last several monitors or the last several OccFld specialists how much they knew about the way that system worked before they filled a billet.
Probably nothing.
Yeah, right. So and then after they've been in the billet, so here's an example. So this is several years ago. I was the company senior enlisted for out at Pendleton while I was at MARSOC, and I basically got a crash course in manpower from Joe Black because admittedly I called him complaining about an issue, right?
Why do I feel like this is going to go wrong?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so as Joe has a particular talent with, he very quickly informed me that he didn't use these words, but he basically told me that I was talking out of my ass.
What was his statement to you previously?
That I was a special kind of stupid. Yeah, right. He didn't say that again. But So he basically gave me a crash course in manpower and how it works. The difference between structure and manning, the difference between or how it works, how the ASR feeds into your staffing goal and all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, prior to that, I didn't know any of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Who does? I mean, where do they teach that?
Yeah, that's right. They don't. And now, having said that, though, I don't know which. It might have been John, but I don't know which OccFld specialist built it. But there's an excellent brief.
Oh yeah, it was John Scoggins.
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, I have emailed that to a number of my subordinate leaders and said, you need to have this discussion with your Marines. First, have this discussion amongst yourselves and ask me any questions you've got, and then have it with your Marines.
I read all his emails.
Oh yeah. But yeah, filling a wide variety of those billets, again, unless you've had to do it, you're not going to know it as well. You're not going to know it as well, right? So like another example is all the guys who've filled the billets up at Marcor Syscom, right? Like those guys know acquisitions. Like the other day when Chief Warrant Officer Mush was talking about the PORs and how why the programs of record are the way they are today versus the way they used to be, right? There used to be one big TAM and one component of the system went down and the whole system was deadlined. That whole system's now out of the fight. But now each component's got its own TAM, so it's modularized. So if that component goes down, the whole system is not down. You can still use the rest of it. Like those are all things that most of us don't know.
Right.
And that's an incredibly valuable education, right? And so obviously, if the course of your career, you won't be able to determine and dictate which of those billets you get to fill. But when you know someone who's been in those billets, ask them questions. You know what I mean? And in the case that I was just describing, so I didn't ask a question, I made a complaint, and I was very quickly reminded that I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about. But after that initial conversation and him and Joe telling me, all right, you need to go read these things, right? So I went and read those things. And since then, when people have discussions about manning and structure, I'm like, you're using those terms incorrectly. Here's how this works, right?
Right.
And I do my best not to be condescending about it because it's, anytime you're doing stuff like that, and look, I know that like most of the guys have said, that, there's a theme, right? Like how many of the folks you've interviewed have not said that there's an element of arrogance about them?
Yeah, that's all of us.
I mean, all of it. I mean, really, when you look at that kind of thing, if you don't believe that you're, the shit, not necessarily definitively, but there's probably a discussion you need to have with yourself about whether this is still the right thing for you to do.
Yeah.
So anyways, they're like that kind of thing. I'm conscious of not being condescending about it, or at least I try not to be. But there's an education that has to happen. And sometimes it has to happen in a direct, frank manner where you say, hey, devil, you're talking out of your ass. Here's how this works. Right. Actually, here's a good example of this. When I was before I left MARSOC, I was the course director for MGySgt, the Intel school for all the guys there, right?
What's that break out to?
The multidiscipline Intel operators course. And so we did not have our own skiff, so we shared.
All source fusion, would you call it that? A little bit different.
So it's different because there is all source fusion in it. As a matter of fact, the course starts. There's 3 weeks where all of the INTs, O2s and 26s, are together in the same room, learning exposure to each other's jobs. What HUMINT does, how SIGINT supports HUMINT, GUINT, all that kind of stuff, right? And they're learning together. And then throughout the rest of the course, we break them into their Intel specialties to improve their proficiencies in those specialties, and in some cases acquiring advanced skills as well. And then throughout the course, they have to come back and work together, so they have to apply those proficiencies in a multi-int way. So there is all source fusion in it, but it's not an all source fusion course, right?
Okay.
But we did not have our own skiff. So we shared a skiff with second and third Marine Raider Support Battalion guys, right? So one day we were over in the skiff doing some prep work for the course, and there were guys there who were in the middle of their workup, and they were complaining about like, this is bullshit. We don't have the right gear. We don't have this. We don't have that. And I looked over, and I was about to start saying, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, but Nate Bailey jumped in before I could, and he's like, "Hey, do you have an S-Conop approved to use that gear?" What do you mean? Brother, you are talking way out of your league right now, right? So like, hey, if you don't have authority to employ the gear, and you haven't, and then he goes on to ask several other questions like, have you requested it? Have you submitted a request to the DSP? It's an element in MARSOC that for like high density or high demand, low density items, they're the adjudicating authority of where something will go, right? Have you submitted a request to the DSP? No. Well, guess what, man? You ain't getting shit because you don't know what the hell you're talking about, right? You don't know how this system works. That's not how this works, and that's not how any of this works, right? And it was one of those moments. It was like, man, good for you. You've learned something. You've heard me, lecture about this. But that's an example, right? So that's an example of you don't know what you don't know, and like most of us, tend to shoot off at the mouth more often than we're, thinking. And that particular group of guys, they got a very short lesson in, you're wrong and here's why. But part of that is our fault for not explicitly teaching them, right? There's only so many hours in a day. There's only so many training days in a year. I get that. But we need to do better about pointing the Marines towards those resources so they can learn that stuff on their own, you can lump that under the overarching category of we can always do better. There's always something that we can do better, and maybe that's just one of those things,
So back to the question about the roadmap, ideal roadmap for the development of a 91.
Yeah.
So you're I think the first overarching thrust was a variance in assignments, so you get a broader perspective.
Right.
But what about and you kind of touched on the leadership aspect of it. What about the technical proficiency?
Yeah. So
is that just going to come with training and experience, or?
So I think that there's an element of a variety of billets in there too, right? So meaning if your first tour is at Radman, right? Like my first tour is at Radman. I remember having arguments with Marines that were senior to me, saying, this is stupid. Why do I have to leave Radman? As a matter of fact, when I got orders from the monitor at the time was Master Guns Threet, and I just finished 2 back-to-back MUs, and the platoon was short on team leaders, and they asked me like, "Hey, you want to take out a team?" I was like, "Hell yeah, I'll take out a team." And then lo and behold, I was issued orders, and I was like, this is stupid. The platoon needs me. Like, I'm here. I want to do it. Why would they not let me deploy? And the response was basically, "Hey, dummy, like this much of your MOS. You need to go learn something else, because you might be able to take out a team right now, but you're a sergeant. You're not too far away from being looked at for staff sergeant, and you don't really know shit, And even back then, during that discussion, I was thinking to myself, that's crap.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, this guy. What does he know, right?
Yeah. See.
Yeah. But then, but looking back though, I would say that this is certainly not true of every single billet inside of MCSB. But clearly, there is a huge advantage to having Marines go from radio battalion to the fort or its regional elements, because they're going to get, in some cases, exposed to some things that are very beneficial. You know what I mean? Even if it's just relationships. You know what I mean? Like, so I can remember. Do you know who? I won't use his name. There's a guy who was at the fort, and he was he's a civilian who used to work, I think he still does. I'm sure he still does. He worked up in the Afghan Topi, right? And he was the guy, right? So like he was the only guy who was for a while authorized to voice ID UBL, right? So he fucking ran that shop. You know what I mean? And after one of my deployments, I went up to the fort for D&I boot camp. And then at that time, so that course doesn't exist anymore. But so at that time, part of the requirement was after the formal classroom, you had to do OJT in a shop. And so I was like, I know I'm going back to Afghanistan. I'm going to go work in the Afghan company. So I met Roger, and I guarantee you talk to anybody, any of the Radbin Marines or MARSOC SIGINTers, any SIGINTer who deployed to Afghanistan, I guarantee you Rogers had detasked some of their targets, right? Now, knowing him, I would call him up and say, hey, Roger, what happened? He's like, oh, it's you. Okay, yeah, I'll turn it back on. You know what I mean? That's the example of the kind of relationships. Like when you know the name of the person that you've got to talk to, Liz, man, I can't remember her name now. She used to work at the Joint Service Desk. She was the lady who would remote into your systems and configure your systems for you, right? Well, she was the only lady who we trusted to do that. And when she left the shop, oh my God, it went to crap. But if we didn't know these people, you're not screwed necessarily, but it's gonna be way more painful,
right?
You know,
there's a lot of human that goes on in the SIGINT game.
That is a fact. that is a fact. I mean,
you have to be able to establish rapport.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to mirror and do a needs values assessment on your colleagues.
So Joe Farina retired a couple weeks ago, and I spoke at his retirement. And then when he was giving his speech, he was talking about how when he was running, I guess it was Assured Pursuit at the time. That's the things that he got done. It was all human. So like he would send these young, fit Marines into these shops where civilian ladies were working, and they would go in there and sweet talk them, and he would get money, equipment, training. It's all relationships, you know? So, I mean, even outside of that aspect of it, you know, the actual technical knowledge that you gain there, it's invaluable, right? So think about all of the different things that are going on in the world, SIGINT-wise, at the national level, strategic level, that there's a relationship between the tactical and the national, that if you don't know that or understand it, then look, you're not as effective as you could be. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting that those tours are the end all be all of SIGINT knowledge. But if you know one thing, then you only know one thing.
Right.
And we all know that the SIGINT game is not one thing.
It's more than one thing.
It's way more than one thing.
Many things.
I used to joke with people about how, matter of fact, when MDIAC was first starting, and they were talking about what kind of SIGINT classes we were going to teach the O2s, and my response was always, I'm not going to. There's nothing I can teach you in SIGINT in an hour. I was like, what I can do is expose you to concepts, and I can explain to you how SIGINT should interact with what you do and how you should interact with what SIGINT does.
Yeah, that's what I've had to give classes to guys at Recon Battalion and other of the several of the other MSCs about what it is that we do.
Yeah.
Up until just recently, I was the only 91 on OccFld and having to cover down on a lot of different areas. You know, and I must say to my to my own disappointment, I've not been able to get down to the wing as much as I probably would like, and same thing with MLG. But for the division, Intel Battalion, the MiG, and the MEB and whatnot, I've been all in, and sometimes in those interactions, you know, I've got to limit, you know, the scope and kind of manage my own expectations of what I could transfer as far as understanding to the target audience.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes it helps when they've got somebody that may have been a Radio Battalion alumni individual, right, you know, at their unit, and so that they kind of they understand what it is that we do, at least more so than most.
Right.
But you know, in the case, it might be a young captain or a lieutenant that did one tour at Radbin, and now they're doing something else, and right. So you know, you've got to kind of tread through those waters carefully. But the third question that Kevin asked is, why are you not as handsome as John?
So those who know me realize that I can go from 0 to sexy in less than 3 seconds. So what I don't want to do is intimidate everyone. So I don't turn it on all the time, because, you know, I don't want everybody to feel bad about themselves.
So you mentioned, and pardon me, I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of a drink here.
Go for it. Go for it. Don't let me stop you.
And hopefully it'll be able to pick up from where I'm at right now.
Yeah, okay.
But you mentioned the fact that you kind of got to be a little cocky
Oh, yeah.
to be in this world of ours.
Oh, yeah.
And I agree with that. But when you've got a whole community of those guys,
Oh, yeah.
what kind of environment does that create? And this is kind of getting to another question for one of our colleagues is, what would you say is the importance of that competitive spirit in the development of a Marine and the fulfillment of his potential?
Sure. So I think it's hugely important. And this ties into something I mentioned a little earlier about when you've got the Marines volunteering for things or requesting like additional responsibility, requesting to be team leader, things like that, right? So the competitive spirit, as you put it, I'm going to go on a tangent and then I'm going to come back. Okay. So I've had this conversation recently with a number of folks about how I would love to have a psychologist study our OccFld, right? And I bet that there's going to be a chunk of the OccFld, and I'm going to throw out numbers, but it's obviously completely made up, right? So I'd be willing to bet that there's a chunk of our OccFld that in high school were competitive athletes, right? So I'm going to say at a high level, but what I mean is for a high level for high school, right? And well, frankly, I know that our OccFld has had like college athletes before too, so not just high school, but there were athletes, right? There were doers of some sort, you know. I bet there's also a chunk that were probably capable of being athletes, but for whatever reason, they just didn't do that because whatever, they weren't interested, you know, whatever the case might be, but physically still capable, you know. And then there's another chunk of our OccFld that was probably, at the risk of using a disparaging term here, there were probably like nerds, right? And now, clearly, all of us have an element of the nerd in us, or else we wouldn't be doing what we're doing.
Most definitely.
Yeah, right? I mean, Sam Carter and I were just geeking out tonight about Star Wars, right? So there's an element of that nerd in all of us. And across those demographics, and there's probably some other subcategories in there too, but across those demographics, the ones who succeed, regardless of what their background is, I would be willing to bet that there is a common theme of the competitive fire. You know what I mean? So interestingly, I'm going to continue on this tangent for a second because I think it's relevant. Not long ago, but a month ago, I sent an email out to the leadership at 2nd Rated Battalion. I read an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, but it was talking about resilience, right? And they did this study. Basically, they were looking at people who, in their childhood, had faced extreme adversity, and they defined extreme adversity as either having been abused, there's some abuse there, or extreme poverty, or things like that, right? And there is a fairly consistent percentage of those people who turn out to be extremely successful. So like, and they mentioned some names like the CEO of Starbucks, Oprah Winfrey, and obviously extremely successful is defined in various ways. So in the case of those two, they're financially very successful, careers very successful. But there's other examples of how that success is defined. And in some cases, it's professionally successful, but maybe not rich or something like that, right? And they wanted to find out, okay, so why is it that this percentage of people turns out to be so successful where others don't, right? And they conducted these interviews with all these people, and the common thread there is that at some point in their childhood, not afterwards, but in their childhood, they described themselves, and they may not use this exact term, but they thought of themselves as fighters, like I'm not gonna let this beat me, right? Like, if it's an abuse situation, I'm not going to let, this person defeat me. Or if it's a poverty situation, I'm not going to let this defeat me. This is not going to define me. It's not going to defeat me, right? But it goes on to say, so then they ask the question,
I can beat this.
Yeah, exactly, right? So then they go, the researchers, they go on to say, okay, so for those people, this is organic to them. This is inherent in who they are. What about everybody else? Can you teach that? Can you teach resiliency? And the answer is yes. And so oddly enough, one of the examples they gave is PT. They didn't call it PT, but it's PT. So they're saying, for a person who wants to build, call it what you want, mental toughness, but resiliency, whatever. Like if you're interested in running, right, and you start a running program, and then one day you look outside and it's raining, right? The difference between additive building of resiliency and not is the person who decides, F that rain, I'm going to go out there and do this. You are incrementally adding levels of toughness to your personality that, when you do that over time, you are building an amount of mental toughness in resiliency in you to where it benefits all aspects of your life. Not in this case, for this example, not just fitness, right? So to answer the question, I think that the competitiveness, mental toughness, it all plays in, right?
So I'm kind of tipping my hand with the title of the podcast. I hadn't really touched on it too much before, but gameness is a quality.
Oh yeah.
As it pertains to fighting dogs. Growing up in Texas, close to Louisiana, close to Mexico, I saw a lot of chickens fight.
Sure.
And I saw more than one dog fight growing up.
Right.
But that particular term, game, speaks to that resiliency and that indomitable spirit.
Yeah.
Right. And you can have big dogs that are game, and you can have little dogs that are game.
Yeah.
But and it kind of goes back to it's the size of the fight in the dog, right?
Right.
There's a jiu-jitsu gi company called Gameness, and they have an American Pit Bull Terrier as their kind of logo. Yeah. But it gets down to that same mindset. and I have to honestly say it's one of the main reasons that I've introduced the boys to that style of grappling.
Sure.
Because it gets tough.
Yeah.
And there's been some instances where I've had to kind of pull back on the reins with the boys and give them some time to cool off.
Yeah.
Because they were getting a little too serious or too aggressive with their training partners, taking it too personal, not being able to extract their ego from the game.
Yeah.
So to speak. But I think that individual competitiveness is one thing, but what I always enjoyed seeing as a senior sergeant at SOTG, and then later as a staff and CO, was when the teams would congeal and develop their own identity and then become competitive with one another. And and you can kind of see it just like a light switch goes off and now they get it.
Oh yeah.
We are Mega Man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that level of camaraderie and it just and at that time when I had the opportunity to observe those teams in that fashion, I was no longer part of a team.
Right.
And it really made me miss it. But you could see, you could almost touch the bond and the connection between them.
Right.
And how they all benefited from that cohesion and that growth was, I mean, it was a sight to behold.
And it's funny the things like the things that will instigate that, right? The catalyst for that. It varies. You know what I mean? I remember the first team I was on. My team leader was Hayes Harrington, right? So he was when we started the workup, he was a staff sergeant, and before we deployed, he got promoted to gunny. But our team call sign was Rain Man. Every single time we went to the field, it rained on us, including on the deployment in the desert in Israel, right? Every time. So that became like our, I won't call it a rallying cry, but I mean, the thing that united us was shared misery, right? And it's not always shared misery. Sometimes it's, just performing well, you know what I mean? And seeing, mutual success. But you're right. The when you watch that happen, you're right. It's a thing to behold, right?
Right. So I've got another question.
All right, lay it on me. Albuquerque, purple, 17.
Yeah, I'm making sure I get one of the good ones here because they've got several. Some of them probably inappropriate.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
How can the sergeant to gunny population make a lasting impact on the OccFld and the service?
So, So I would say this: we can never ever lose sight of the fact that our job, straight propaganda. I'll tell you straight up propaganda, and I preach this to the Marines in my company right now, and I will preach to the Marines here at Goodfellow. We exist to protect American lives and to kill our nation's enemies. If the Marines do not absorb that, live that, function with that knowledge, then we're losing something, right? So, and obviously, the SIGINT OccFld itself is not a combat arms OccFld. However,
it does contribute to lethal velocity.
Absolutely, it does. It contributes in a lot of ways, right? So, I think Afghanistan taught a lot of Marines that.
Or the velocity of lethality. Right?
Sure. I mean, in this case, I'll speak for my experiences at MARSOC, but I'm sure this is true for the Radman test that went out. How many Marines were a trunk monkey man in the 240? I was. You know what I mean? How many Marines, conducted a DF of some sort that led you directly to Taliban and a gunfight ensued? You know what I mean? The things that we do. Again, first and foremost, I will always put protecting American lives on top, right? Because we want to bring everybody home. And that, I will also say that I extend that philosophy beyond just the battlefield. That includes back here in the rear, right? That includes our obligation to society. But there is no higher responsibility to me other than protecting my family, right? Because that's a very specific, personal thing. But as in the role of a Marine, that is the highest responsibility we have, right? And killing our nation's enemies. Now, obviously, again, we are not directly a combat arms OccFld, but the things that we do directly lead to the deaths of enemy on the battlefield, right? Now, when you have, let's just say that you've got a Marine who's maybe not your stellar performer, maybe not the most physically gifted or even physically fit, we'll say, because gifted doesn't necessarily mean fit. And when you have a discussion with them, and you try to get to the root of, why they're not performing as well as they could maybe, without getting into the, going down a rabbit hole. And I believe that they have not bought into the concept that we protect American lives and we kill our nation's enemies. Recently.
So what do you think that what's the working concept or the mental construct that they're
for them
operating under, if not that?
So I think it's not real to them. You know what I mean? I think that, I don't even know if they still do that whatever that thing is in boot camp, like, hey, we're going to war, who wants to volunteer kind of thing. Like, yeah. I would imagine that probably because of the Great Desert Wars that they probably stopped that because for the most part, most of them were going to go to combat, right? You know what I mean?
We should cover that a little bit in depth later.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I don't think it's real to them. They joined, and their recruiters told them whatever they told them, and their drill instructors do the things the drill instructors do. Then they come to A school, and they're very focused on learning their MOS skills, things like that. So by the time they get to the fleet, I don't know that I think they've been away from that discussion. So one of the things that I talk to my Marines now about is, listen, if you're not, so this younger generation, they tend to be, it's obviously not true universally, but they tend to be more globally aware than we were as kids, right? Because obviously internet access, Reddit, all these kinds of things, and maybe globally aware is not exactly correct. But like, look at the things that the Secretary of Defense has been saying. Look at the things that General Neller has been saying. So General Neller talks about EW and EWSTs and EW support to infantry. And I tell my Marines, that's not some mythical other unit. He is talking about you. He's talking about you personally, 2nd Radio Battalion. There's some of the greatest military minds our nation has to offer believe that we're going to war, right? Now, that may not ever happen. As we're seeing with North Korea right now, hey, there's a paradigm shift here, maybe, right? So a little too early to tell. But there's the potential for that paradigm to shift, right? But I freely admit that I don't have the the view into Secretary of Defense Mattis's mind or General Neller's mind. So I'm sure that at least some of the things that they're saying is due to the role that they're filling and things like that. But if we're not prepared for that, if the Marines are not prepared for that, for the mental, physical rigors of combat, they need to get that way. Because in the world today, what is ostensibly peacetime right now could very quickly shift to nation-on-nation warfare. And if they don't get that, if we are not reinforcing that in their minds, then we're fucking up. You know what I mean? And that's in my view, that's a leadership role, right? So we can't. It's not sufficient for us to just look at them and say, "Hey, your PFT's not good enough," right? That doesn't do it. That's not real. You know what I mean? Maybe they're not overly concerned right now about whether you get promoted or a meritorious promotion or things like that. What's real is, hey, devil, you personally may have to go to war soon. Are you ready? Is your buddy next to you ready? Because if they're not, you need to get that way, like right now. You know what I mean? Like, here's a great example. We talked. I told you I was on float when 9/11 happened, right? So how many guys prior to 9/11 were mentally ready on the spot right then to deploy to go to Afghanistan?
I was in Monterey, California, just waiting to get to the fucking fleet.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, but so funny story about this, right? So when 9/11 happened, my team was in Kosovo. We were sitting on the border of so in the southern part of Kosovo, there's a area referred to as the Elephant's Foot, and it's like right on the border of Kosovo, Macedonia, and Albania. And so my RT, we were down there doing counter smuggling operations, which was, I mean, I remember back then we used to, guys prior to that deployment, guys would, guys that had been in Kosovo, they used to say, "Oh, these guys, they just came back from real world ops in the Balkans," right? and back then we were like, "Oh man, what was it like? Were you in the shit?" Stuff like that. As a matter of fact, on my first float, I have a vivid memory of this. My first float on Hayes Harrington's team, we went into Kosovo for, I don't remember what it was, 30, 60 days, something like that. And we were doing, basically we were doing RNAS, right? So there was SIGINT involved too, but we were up near the Serbian border. And after we got back on the boat, I was on NSANet talking with guys like on chat back in Rabbit. And Joe Farina was the one like chatting with me. And like they were asking questions like, "Oh, were you patrolling in condition 1?" Right? so in 2000, that question, the fact that we had to ask that question, "Oh, were you patrolling at condition 1?" Like that was a big deal, Now fast forward to, now we're down in the Elephant's Foot. It's 2001, and we're doing fairly cheesy. I guess that's not fair. It's not cheesy. It's just it's all relative, right? So we were tasked with something, and we were performing our mission. And the spot that we were working out of, there was a Brit and a Norwegian SIGINT element nearby, and so we were sitting at our pause, and we had a guy on our team who was he was a Russian linguist, and he's one of those dudes who these guys who's just gifted at language, right?
Yeah,
so,
polyglot.
Yeah. So he got like 3 3s out of the turbo-serbo course, and while we were there, he taught himself the Macedonian dialect, right? While on pause, right? So he's on the gear, collecting, listening, transcribing, and this Norwegian chick officer comes over and tells us, So I don't remember exactly how she phrased it. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to tell you. Like, this is crazy. And we're like, what the fuck are you talking about, lady? And she's like, you don't know? We're like, no. She's like, tune your radio to BBC. So we tuned to BBC, and the first plane is at the tower, and we're listening to live to people talking about the second plane hitting the tower, right? And so like at that point, all of us are like, holy shit. So now we're on the radio calling back to our OCAC saying, hey, what's the deal? What are we doing? What's going on? You know, and obviously, you know, the Radman dead doesn't know the answer to that question, right? But not long after that, they pulled us out. They extracted us.
But I think it's funny that at the team level, you think that they
right.
do.
That's right. That's like, oh, the OCAC must know all this, right? The president informed them directly of what the nation's plans are. So now we're like, you know, we're like ready for a fight. You know what I mean? And of
course.
So they extract us.
Gameness.
That's right. And so the whole MEU gets pulled back. We get back on the boat. And now so this happened like it was like there was not a long time left in our float, right? So it was we were on the second half of it. If I remember right, we were like in the 5th month of the float. And so now the question was, oh, are we going to Afghanistan? You know what's going to happen? Are we going to go fight? And it's a little bit different because you're on the MEU, so you're already in an operational mindset. So we were like, let's go, right? And I don't know the answer to this question. But so to what brought up the story was, how many Marines, not just at Radman, but across the Marine Corps, when that happened, were ready to go fight, right? Now, some of them, I'm sure actually a good majority were like, fuck this, let's go get these guys, right? And then the reality sets in. When you go to combat for the first time and the first gunfight that you're in, and everyone is going to experience this differently, right? Some guys are going to be like, yeah, fucking let's whoop it on, right?
Right.
Others are not. And the question that everyone is going to have to ask themselves on an individual level, are you, and you know, cliche aside, are you ready to fight tonight? You know, everyone has to ask themselves that question. Are you ready right now for the mental and physical rigors of combat? And if you're not, you need to get that way, like right now, you know? And if as leaders, we're not preaching that, then we're wrong.
So General Nicholson touches on that all the time.
Great minds think alike, right?
Are you going to be ready when the bell rings?
Yeah.
And I love that man. He motivates the shit out of me.
Yeah.
He makes me when I hear him talk, I just want to go just hit somebody randomly.
Yeah.
But I don't.
just go pick a fight, right? like, hey, fucker, what are you looking at? Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you know, and it touches on a lot of the key themes that have been the common thread lines in some of these interviews that I've conducted. You know, are we ready? What could we be doing better?
Yeah.
No slack, right?
Yeah, no slack.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of another thing that Sonny said, you know, when he mentioned that he sometimes feels like he's got one more in him.
Right.
You know, because, you know, we're coming up towards the end of our careers, and, you know, here you are getting ready to take over the schoolhouse. You know, somebody on the outside looking in could say, this is you hanging up your gloves.
Sure.
Or your spurs.
Yeah, sure.
Depending on if you see yourself as a pugilist or a cowboy.
Right. Everybody wants to be a cowboy until it's time to do cowboy shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to that point, the other thing that I wanted to ask you was, as a master sergeant or master guns, what type of relationship have you adopted with your gunnies and staff sergeants in order to motivate them or elevate them to the level of resiliency, professionalism, competence, tenacity that you think that they need to have?
Yeah.
And how do you approach that? You know, it's obviously different than going gunny to sergeant.
Sure.
So what are some of the things that you've adopted in your mentoring
Sure.
role to gunnies and staff sergeants?
So this is going to be kind of a roundabout way to answer your question, but I know that one of the things that I experienced as a gunny, senior gunny, and sometimes it's the gunnies asking me, and sometimes it's me bringing it up to them. But by far, one of the most difficult transitions I had to make in my career was the realization that as a senior gunny, I was no longer the doer, right? Now, this is different than whether I'm still proficient or not. This was understanding that it is no longer my role to be the team guy going forward, doing things like that. And it was my role to prepare everyone else, or not everyone else, but obviously the folks in my sphere of influence, to be those guys to go do things, right? And it was my job at that point to, a combination of all the administrative. Is your team built out well? Have you built the plan to get your Marines ready? Are they physically ready? Are they technically ready? Are they tactically ready? All those things, right? And I am going to assume, and I've had this conversation with others, right? And I have not had anybody yet tell me that this was not true for them. But that transition was by far the hardest transition that I had to make in my career.
Which is what specifically?
So that role of going from the doer to the the supervisor, right? I mean it's an oversimplification of terms there, but as those gunnies and their relationship with their subordinates, there is an element of leadership by example. There is an element of leadership. So whatever the opposite of leadership by example is, right? Leadership through mentoring, education, whatever that is, right? All those things that if they can't take their young Marines and instill in them the values, the skills, like all those things, if they're not able to build that resiliency in their Marines, then they need to reevaluate what they're doing. I don't mean that in the sense of, hey, thanks for your service, go away. This is the hey, if you what's the definition of insanity? You do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, right? Like if in any unit your staff and COs are complaining like, oh, these sergeants suck and blah blah blah. Well, that one of the things that I very emphatically try to impart on, especially the gunnies, especially them, and the master sergeants too, right? So my peers in general, 91s, gunnies, and 29s, right? When you are in a leadership position and you are looking down your chain of command and you say that they have a leadership problem, then you are part of that leadership problem, right? Because this is the part that I've never got, right? I'm fascinated by this. Guys who do that, what they don't realize is what they're saying is, I suck because I haven't been able to fix this problem, right? And the gunnies have got to be conscious of that, right? Not only in terms of don't bitch about your subordinates, that's not what I'm getting at, but you got to realize that your Marines are a reflection of you, right? And if you see things that in them that are not good, you have to start to question what you're doing, because either you are unconsciously modeling a behavior that they're emulating, or there's some other factor at play that you've got to diagnose and figure out, right? And obviously that's not true if it's like onesies and twosies, right? I mean, if it's a systemic problem in your unit, then you've got to look at yourself. Right. You have to do that. Basic Marine Corps leadership thing. Know yourself, seek self-improvement, and figure out what's going on, right? And on both the leadership side and the technical side, you can get away with not being the most technically proficient guy if you're a good leader. You can get away with not being the most proficient leadership guy if you're technically and tactically sound. There's a balance to all of that, and you have to maintain that balance, because if you just focus on one thing, then your Marines are just going to focus on one thing. The 8999 community talks about the whole Marine concept quite a bit, right? And I believe that. I mean, it's certainly not wrong. You know what I mean? But you have to, and this is where there's a lot of room for philosophical disagreement on this, but But I would argue that the qualities that make you a good, quote, Marine rather than SIGINTer, those qualities are theoretically the same qualities that make you a good SIGINT Marine, right? So if you have the discipline and you have the initiative to do the right thing as a Marine, whether it's, your appearance, your physical fitness, or whatever else, why would that same level of discipline and initiative not apply to your OccFld? Now that doesn't mean that it works out that way all the time, but that's what frustrates me a lot is when you see Marines that have the capacity to demonstrate that level of discipline and initiative and all those things, but they don't apply it across all of the things that are expected of them. Well, now you're suspect, right? Now it's like, okay, well, what's going on? In some cases, it might be, a fairly innocuous explanation. In other cases, maybe not, right? But that's your job. That's your job to figure that out. It is not acceptable to just say, this kid sucks or this kid's a turd, right? You're not allowed to quit on your Marines ever, right? Up.
When you were talking, that reminded me of that movie, A Bronx Tale, where the guy says the saddest thing in life is wasted talent.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think what's sadder is a leader who's not capable of developing that talent that he's been entrusted with. Right. Because it's not just him not living up to an individual Marine not living up to his potential, but now you've got a leader of Marines who's incapable or unwilling to develop those underneath him.
Right.
And I recently had a conversation with a senior colleague of ours about that very thing. He was mentioning the fact that our staff sergeants are probably the weakest point in our organizational structure, and but my counter to that was, what are we doing to develop? If we identify that as a need or a requirement or a gap or a deficiency, how are we addressing it?
Sure.
How are you addressing it? Because I've got staff and COs underneath my observation that may not necessarily be underneath my structure or hierarchy, but they are within my field of view. And whenever I see that they need help, I'm on it. I've got young sergeants that aren't getting the mentoring that they need from the staff and COs that are junior to me, so I snatch them up.
Yeah. Right.
When and where I've got the time. I mean, I've sat down with several Marines, one in particular, who has subsequently PCS, but I made him write his own fitness report.
Yeah.
Top to bottom, section A, B,
the whole thing,
all the way through.
Yeah, right.
Section I comments, and he's like, "Well, so I got to do the RS and the RO?" I'm like, fuck yeah, you got split personalities now.
Right.
But be honest, be brutally honest. Do that objective self-assessment as best you can, and make sure it's worded correctly.
Yeah.
That you fit in the space and all of that.
Follow the rules, color inside the lines.
And we're gonna start to generate a profile for you, right? And that kind of thing, because it was needed. No one had ever sat down with him and given him a class on fitness reports,
right?
And I find that hard to believe.
Right.
You've been in for 5-6 years now, and no one has yet sat you down and explained to you probably one of the single most important documents as it pertains to your career progression and this time of years in uniform, and so when you get to that point where it goes beyond just negligence to gross negligence.
Sure.
So say you see it in a gunny or a staff sergeant, how does MGuns Cornett deal with that?
So I would say that I've been lucky in the sense that I have not had a whole lot of experience with gunnies being grossly negligent in that way, right? What I have seen is occasions in which I'll have a conversation with somebody about the methods that they're employing. You know what I mean? So like, now I'll come back to your question in a second, but in the case of like where I see gunnies where I question the methods that they're employing. My first, first echelon of maintenance, if you will, it would be to have a conversation, right? Because one of my overarching philosophies in the Marine Corps is that everyone, unless I already know them, right? Everyone has the benefit of the doubt with me until they prove otherwise, right? Everyone's got the benefit of the doubt. They for starters, they put their paw in there and said, "Hey, I'm going to do this thing," right? So automatically, they have the benefit of the doubt. Now, sometimes through their actions and through their words and things like that, they demonstrate that they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt, and then you have to take other actions. But so my default mentality is that if they're doing something either wrong or like whether it's morally or ethically or technically, I assume they just don't know. Right? Someone has not taught them this. So the first step is have the conversation, the very simple, frank conversation, like, hey, this is how this works, or this is a couple different techniques that you can employ to do this thing, right? And then, after that, if the if it continues, well, then the nature of the dynamic of the conversation changes, right? And to put a point on it, I've had a number of conversations with Marines, oddly enough, about simple counselings. Counselings as a tool are phenomenal, and here's why. So, a Marine of any rank is doing something fucked up, or maybe not even necessarily fucked up, but substandard, right? They're not doing something that they should be doing, or they're doing it poorly. Step one, have a counseling, right? And you tell them, in this case, verbally, right? So we're not talking about misconduct, right? Just job performance. And you explain to them what they're doing wrong, right? And then the second time it happens, that's where you sit down formally and you spell out in your counseling sheet, all right, this is the deficiency. This is exactly how you're going to correct it. These are the resources you have available to correct it. And this is the timeline in which it's going to be corrected by, right? And now you've established a firm metric to evaluate this, right? The beauty of counselings is that no matter what, I win. Because if the Marine doesn't correct it, then you have an avenue for pursuing a number of different options. One of them would be ADSEP, right? But if nothing else, they're going to not be allowed to re-enlist because they're going to have a stack of 6105s and possibly an NJP, right? So that Marine's going to leave, and I'm going to get a performer in his place. Or he corrects himself, and I've got a performer. Either way, I win, right?
Right.
So one of the things that I have seen in not just the gunnies, but the staff NCOs, they can be, not always, but they can be quick to they can be quick to lose interest in investing in the Marines. Like, they're not getting it, or this guy sucks, or I don't have time for this. I need him replaced on my team, whatever the case might be, right? And I think that is, I'll say it again. You are never allowed to quit on your Marines. So even the guys that that are classified as the turd, right? Which I don't really necessarily buy into that entirely. I mean, there's exceptions, of
course.
But even that guy, right? As long as he is, you are in his chain of authority, you are responsible for that Marine, right? In all aspects of that definition. You know what I mean? So I would ask, think about this, and I'm not trying to go down this rabbit hole, but obviously we all have suicide awareness training, all that kind of thing. What percentage of the Marines who end up taking that last desperate act, how many of them were the guys that were classified as turds, and how many of their leaders were not engaged with them right up until the point that they exited the Marine Corps? I don't know what that percentage is, but I'm sure some of them are. So my point, you are never allowed to quit on your Marines, never, right? Right up until the day that they leave, they have family, they have mothers, they have people in the world who care about them, and it is your job to, at a minimum, ensure that they remain safe and taken care of, right? They may not ever be your rock star. They may not ever be your solid performer, but that does not absolve you of your responsibilities as a leader. But that mentality, and that's an extreme example, right? But that mentality has to apply across the board for all of your Marines. If you look, these Marines aren't stupid. They know who's being invested in and who's not. And in some cases, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Marines that you invest in because you think that they're your performers, they're going to continue to be performers because they're getting additional mentoring, they're getting additional training. Matter of fact, I can't remember if it Malcolm Gladwell or in Freakonomics where they talk about relative age. Are you familiar with this discussion?
Relative age.
Yeah, right. So again, I don't remember which book it was. It was either Malcolm Gladwell or maybe it was in Freakonomics. I don't remember which. But there's the story starts with I think it was Gladwell.
As it pertains to what, relative dating or?
Well, so it comes to performance, right?
Okay.
So the story starts with I think it was Gladwell. I think it was in Outliers. But the story starts with there's this Canadian psychologist. He's attending the National Hockey Championships, 18 and under, with his wife, and his wife is like looking at the program, and she says, "Hey, do you know when these boys were born?" He's like, "Well, yeah, they're 18 and under, so this year." She's like, "No, what month?" He looks at her like, "What are you talking about, right?" So he takes a look at the program, and they're all born in like January and February. So he gets curious and starts doing the study. So the cutoff date for Canadian hockey leagues is January 1st. So if you're born on January 1st and somebody else in the league is born in, June, July, all the way through December, you're functionally a year older than them, right? So you're the same age group, but you have, in the case of sports, you have a year more physical development, mental development. So what happens is, and this pattern repeats itself, those people, those kids, and the youth leagues are identified as being like the all-stars, right? So what happens? They get extra coaching, they get extra practice, they get extra directed practice by.
So there's a cumulative effect in the aggregate over time.
And not only that, but it also shows that same pattern repeats itself academically, right? So relative, so that's where the term relative age comes from, right? So it starts in youth where like you might both be 7 and playing Little League baseball, but really, because of the quirks of the way that the cutoff dates for sign up for leagues works, you might be functionally a year or 9 months older than this other kid, and it doesn't. The pattern repeats itself across all sports, baseball, hockey, football, all sports, right? So it repeats itself academically, and I'm certainly not a scientist, so I guarantee you there's people that would debate this.
So here's what I have. Cutoff dates for academic cohort structuring, including the setting of academic years, are usually determined by national education authorities and tend to be based on autumn start dates.
Yeah.
So August or September cutoff dates are common in the Northern Hemisphere, and February or March cutoff dates are common in the Southern Hemisphere. This tendency reflects the historical need for children to be involved in summertime agricultural work, with school starting after harvesting. A relative age effect in academia is illustrated in this attached graph, which shows the percent deviation from month of birth profile norms evident in graduations from Oxford University over a 10-year period. Academic relative age effects seem to be moderated by culture.
Yeah, and so obviously there's, of all the things that will determine academic success, that's one of many, I'm sure, right? But it's interesting though. So like, another example would be the single greatest predictor for whether somebody will make it to play in the major leagues for baseball is whether their dad played Major League Baseball, right? So the theory is that kid at home is getting coaching from a professional baseball player, right? And clearly it's not, again, universally true. There are plenty of guys whose kids don't go on to play pros, whatever. But within statistical categories, that one is the most predictive, right? But the reason I bring that up in this context is if we are paying attention to certain Marines positively by providing them additional mentoring, additional training, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And if you're neglecting a certain group of your Marines because you're thinking of them as turds or non-performers, then they're going to continue to be non-performers, right? What's the 80-20 rule? 20% of your folks are going to occupy 80% of your time, right? And usually we think of them as the troublemakers, right?
Right.
Well, okay. So what if you approach that differently, and rather than specifically thinking of them as discipline problems, why not flip that mentally a little bit and think about it as, okay, rather than saying these are my trouble kids, okay, these are the ones who need me the most, right? And so you have to invest in that, And it doesn't always work out that way. And as you progress in rank, it becomes a different dynamic, right? But how many Medal of Honor winners prior to whatever event spurred them to action to win the Medal of Honor? How many of those guys in the rear were known as discipline problems? Quite a few of them, you know?
I think you're right.
So what we have to, as leaders have to do is recognize that, again, you're never allowed to quit on your Marines. But more than that, you have to figure out, whatever you want to call it, the Marine Corps version of No Child Left Behind, right? You have to figure out, time is a commodity, right? You have to figure out how to invest your time, where to invest your time to get the most return. Is it sufficient to have one rock star, right? Or do you need to have a team of better than average? Now, I would argue that that answer is going to vary, right? So situations will dictate. You never want to prevent a guy who has the potential to be a rock star from becoming a rock star. But you also are not the only factor at play. You're not the only variable here. So there's ways of still developing that rock star while taking the guys who are subpar to above average. And maybe they will only ever be above average, and that's fine. But if you are not exacting every last bit of potential out of your Marines, then guess what? You're fucked up in one way or another,
So this next question I got from Nick Watson.
Okay. Here we go. Here it comes.
What can we do to increase the level of retention for initial acquisition Marines or initial accession Marines leaving Goodfellow and heading out to?
In terms of skills?
We're just the level of retention.
Yeah. So the things that they learn and Okay. So the first and obvious answer to that question is, one, I am better looking and smarter than Nick is. So he just needs to realize that right off the bat. So here we've had this conversation over the last week and a half quite a bit, right? And sometimes
us here or you and Nick?
No, like here in the working group, right? So some of them are sidebar discussions, some of them are in the group. And I'll be careful about how I say this because I don't want this to seem like I'm attacking the guys that are running the school now because that's not the case, right? But I think that there is no substitute for interacting with. So in this case, for singers, there is no substitute for interacting with live RF over the air, right? There are things that you can learn in such a way that it will stick with you forever, rather than classroom lecture, PowerPoint, right? We have to do a better job. So some things have to be done in the classroom PowerPoint lecture, right? Some things do, What we have to do is ask ourselves frequently, is this the best way to deliver the information, right? And not just deliver the information, but deliver it so it's retained, right? So like, think back in your throughout your life, right? Pick anything. Doesn't even matter what the topic is. Some lesson that you learned, right? And I guarantee you, whatever the thing that sticks out the most, there's a story to that lesson. Whether it's something that you learned in SIGINT, whether it's something that you learned in your personal life, in your moral and ethical development. There's a thing that you can point back to and say, I remember this because of this thing, right? With this incident, this person, whatever it is, right? So what we have to do is manufacture those things for these students, right? Maybe it's even in the classroom when you're having a discussion about something and you're tying it to something real, something that happened to you downrange. You have to put context to it so that it is really and truly absorbed and not just remembered then data dumped later. So while I was an instructor at MGySgt, we used to have these conversations all the time. Like, what is the most effective, efficient way to put what we know into these students' heads so that it stays, And we used to toy around with various delivery mechanisms, and some of them worked. Some of them probably worked less well, and some of them didn't work, right? And I think that we can't be afraid of experimenting with that. And in some cases, that thing is going to vary student to student. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think anybody can fully appreciate that until they've had to kind of address a variable target population description in a formal schoolhouse setting, because you're going to get all types.
Oh, yeah. So, you know what's funny about that? So, okay. So, Adam Dyack, we had our students were Lance Corporals through Gunnies, right? So now, and keep in mind, some of these Gunnies and Staff Sergeants have got multiple combat deployments. So as the instructor,
So they're not spring chickens.
No, they're not spring chickens. So you have to figure out the way to deliver the material in such a way that the Lance Corporal is not overwhelmed, but yet the gunny is still going to remain engaged and not think to himself, "Oh, I know this shit already." You know what I mean? That could be a trick, right? So this actually ties back into that resiliency study that I was talking about, right? So as whether you're trying to instill resiliency or to teach something academic, you have to understand at least a little bit about the Marines that you're dealing with. So an example on the resiliency side would be, okay, you've decided that your platoon isn't as mentally tough as they should be, and you're going to start implementing a program to build that. And the first thing you're going to do is go on a conditioning hike, right? Okay. So let's say that you've got a member of your platoon who is who comes from a background where like he and his dad were hiking up and down the Appalachians, hunting or hiking, whatever, you know what I mean? And he's going to think that event is nothing, right? And depending on his personality, he can either be a problem for you because he's like, this is bullshit. Or you can, I was going to use the word subvert, but that's not really accurate. You can employ him to the benefit of the unit, right? So even if it's a private, even if so we don't really get privates in the fleet anymore, right? But even if he's a PFC or a Lance Corporal, if you're smart, what you'll do is you'll talk to that Marine and say, hey, listen, we might see some Marines on this conditioning hike that need a little bit of help, whatever the case might be. I'm asking you to help me bring them up to your level, right? So you can employ them to the benefit of all, or you can alienate him and let him think, this is bullshit, this is so easy, right? Same thing. It's the same thing academically, right? I'm sure that you're familiar with, the adult learning model and experiential learning, all that kind of stuff, right?
Pedagogy.
Yeah, exactly. How do you teach adults versus how do you teach all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of theories and a lot of methods that people can employ. But the principle, for those who don't know, the principle of adult learning is it's assumed that your life experiences are going to inform and contribute to everybody else, and so they want you to share your experiences with these things, right? The same thing applies in the classroom, except like at Goodfellow, where you're talking about all junior Marines. So that's a different story. You're at that point, you're not really relying on their experience in the MOS, but what you can do is use their life experiences to relate it in some way to what they're doing, right? Now, having said that, to be fair, we are talking about SIGINT here, so like kids don't grow up doing SIGINT unless like you're Sonny's kid Rocco.
I love that kid. He's so funny.
Oh yeah. So I'll show you a video later. Sonny actually texted it to me a couple years ago, teaching him DIAC actually. Sonny showed up to one of our training events. He brought Rocco with him, and we were teaching him how to use some of the gear. There's a video of me showing Rocco how to do this stuff, and he was good too. But most kids don't grow up like that, right?
Right.
So what you have
I will also say that he's got pretty good OPSEC.
Yeah, right.
So the last night that I was in Hawaii, Sonny and Loretta invited me to spend the night at their house, and he was going to take me to the airport in the morning. So I checked out of the hotel, and Sonny and Rocco picked me up, and I said, hey man, before I head back to head out to the house, you might stop and getting a burger, get something to eat. Loretta runs a tight ship, so they eat very healthy in that household. And being cognizant of that, I figured, I test the waters and see how strong the discipline was. So I ordered a cheeseburger, some chicken nugget, the whole combo, chicken nuggets, and then I got two. I started to order a McFlurry, and I asked Rocco, I said, "Hey Rocco, you ever had a McFlurry?" He goes, "What's that?"
Yeah.
I said, "It's like ice cream, but it's got Oreo cookies in it, and they're all blended up." And Sonny's looking at me like, "Oh man, you're gonna do it. You're gonna get it."
Yeah.
And so I got him a McFlurry. So he killed it, right? So we get to the house, and I came clean with Loretta because I know she doesn't fuck around, and I told her, I said, "Hey, we got Rocco a McFlurry," and she kind of like looked like she kind of looks at Sonny like, "What'd you do that for?"
Right.
And I said, but let's just see if he'll rat me out, because I told him we're in the car, "Don't you tell your mom I got you this," and and he when she asked him, she said, "Did you eat anything?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm not hungry," and like he kept evading, but in a way that was like very well executed. And it wasn't only until the very end that he kind of knew that she was hip to what had taken place, that he finally gave me up.
That's awesome. So to Nick's question though, I think the answer is this is constant experimentation in the delivery of curriculum, and again, I think that here's one example, and it's only one example, right? So RF propagation, right? RF theory. You can talk about that in the classroom all day long, right? But in the Marines, they're going to receive, retain, test out, all that stuff, right? And they might even data dump it. You can get to the fleet and you can ask them questions, and they'll be able to recite off, the equations for free space path loss, all that kind of stuff, right? But until they actually interact with the physical environment combined with the RF environment over the air, it is a rare person that the light bulb goes off and goes, "Oh shit, I get this now."
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so, I think that's one of the things that and I'm glad to see that McKiss and others are really taking an all-in approach to the implementation of model and simulation in the training environment, persistent learning environment. But it's not the only answer. Yeah. Right. And as a reinforcement function, it's great. As an introduction to concepts, key concepts, it's perfect. But it's not a single solution in and of itself. And I was able to listen to several keynote speakers at ITSEC. Have you been there?
I've not been there, but I'm aware of it.
So the Inter-Service Industry Training, Simulation, and Education Conference is effectively a video game conference for the Department of Defense.
For nerds.
And nerds and camis. Yeah. And listening to some of the speakers there, and kind of highlighting some of their successes and their missteps, I gained a better appreciation of the appropriate application of those types of training tools. But the single greatest takeaway was it won't do it all. Yeah. And there's some people who will take that approach and try to, I guess, make that case. Yeah. But it doesn't really hold all the answers. But like one of the key examples that I did see was there was a CQB shoot house. Oh yeah. That was set up in multiple configurations, but because it took so long for each stick to go through their iterations, they had set up the teams that were waiting to go in with an iPad first-person shooter networked application that allowed them to rehearse before their actual physical rehearsal. Absolutely. And something like that, I think would be great. So, so if you're talking about maybe like a MSOR, MSOS or type environment, set up in a mount facility, you go through in a virtual capacity before you actually have to execute it live.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think would be a good application of something along those lines. But that kind of gets to Nick's second point, which is, or question rather, how should we, or how can we effectively respond to the rapidly changing technologies from a TCOM perspective?
So I don't think there's an easy answer to this. I mean, so the simplistic answer would be RadBin mods, right? So the RadBin modernization program. So that's theoretically what they're there to do. So that's a tough one, right? So I think we all know, or at least most of us do anyway, that the DoD procurement and acquisition process is very convoluted, difficult to manage, right? Difficult to maneuver in. Even if you do all the right things, you write your urgent need statement, you write your you establish your requirements, all those things, you do all that correctly the first time, right? Which is unlikely, but you do all that correctly the first time, and it gets routed to all the right people. And nobody disputes anything that you're saying or requesting, whatever. And then by the time it makes its way through the system, that's a long time, right? It's a long time. There's no easy answer to this one. I think that the real answer is that our programs of record are going to continue to go through that same, Byzantine bureaucratic process, and in the meanwhile, we're going to have RadBin mods and others looking forward with emerging technologies and solutions for those technologies that are going to get FUI'd to the RadBins. So for those who don't know, a FUI is a field user evaluation, right? So it's the concept is it's a new piece of gear, something like that. You're going to take it, test it, provide feedback, and then maybe that we invest in it, right? Yeah, I mean that's it is a shitty answer, but our bureaucracy is not set up to rapidly respond to evolving technologies.
Kevin called that a nerd question from Nick Watson.
You know what? Let me tell you a quick story about Kevin, right? I
love quick stories about Kevin.
Okay, so check this out. So the other night I was listening to Kevin's podcast, and I started.
What'd you think?
I thought it was really good. As a matter of fact, so that question actually ties into. I started texting him. I haven't seen Kevin in person probably since 2002, since we were both here at Goodfellow at A&R school, right? I mean, we knew each other in A school too, right?
He loves it every time he's mentioned on another person's episode.
Oh, I know. But you know what else? You know who hates it when Kevin's mentioned? Sean.
Why is that?
Oh, come on. Sean and Kevin have this competition thing, right? So before you were interviewing Sean, he was trying to figure out how to one up Kevin's interview, right? So anyways, I was texting him. I was like, dude, this is a surreal moment for me. Like, I'm listening to your voice, right? I'm sitting in my hotel room. I'm listening to your voice on the podcast. In some ways, I feel like I'm part of the conversation. And I'm listening to you in the place, the city of San Angelo, the last place that I saw you, whatever it was. So 16 years ago now, right? That was one of a series of things lately where, as you mentioned, we're on the tail end of our careers, right? So there's been a series of events lately that were like miniature reunions, and like I'm reminded of all these things from when I was a young man and a young Marine, and Kevin was part of that, right? So as I'm listening to his podcast and like some of the phrases that he's using, and obviously his personalities don't really change. So his personality is the same, like I was chuckling to myself in my hotel room because I was like, oh, it's a total Kevin thing to say, right? And I haven't seen him in 16 years. You know what I mean? I've heard a lot. This is probably a not accurate statement, but like I've kept in touch like from a distance, right? Like we haven't exchanged emails, phone calls, texts, and all that time. But that's one of the beautiful things about the Marine Corps is that I can not talk to him for 16 years send him a single text, and we're having a conversation like it was yesterday, right?
Right.
So anyways, so when you say that that's a nerd comment, I can hear him saying that in my head,
So speaking of nerd questions,
Yeah.
here's one from Sam Carter.
Okay.
What's the line of demarcation between formal school training and unit training?
Ooh. Okay.
And what is a good staff and CO's role in defining that?
So do you want me to start with the technical answer?
Sure.
All right. So the way that TNR events work, right? And this is all sort of in theory, because in practice it doesn't always work this way, right? So the 51s, we talked about this today, right? So when you code an individual TNR event as formal, in theory, what you're saying is that training solution is a formal TCOM school, right? Resident school, where you're sitting in a classroom learning things, okay? So what the conversation we had with the 51s today in the TNR working group was, if you code something formal, but it is not an MOS producing school, TCOM's not real interested in that, right? So you might say, hey, we want this to be formal school, but TCOM may not resource it, right? And they might just say, you know what, I hear you, figure it out.
Suck it up.
Right, exactly. So the technical answer theoretically is the line of demarcation is that formal schools is a thing that you've identified in the TNR manual, but it doesn't always work out that way, as the 51s discovered by having coded some 2,000 level. So 2,000 level meaning individual skills advanced versus 1,000 level skills, which is individual skills basic. So all your A school stuff. They had coded some 2,000 level skills that's formal, but the school never materialized because TCOM wasn't interested, right? Now, that's the technical side. The real answer is, much like everything else in life, is it depends, right?
I love that phrase.
Yeah. So for a staff NCO, here I'll give you a couple of examples, right? Let's say we're talking about a collection team of some sort. Doesn't matter if it's an RT, LEV, SST, doesn't matter, right? So if you identify a training deficiency, well, for starters, the staff NCO should have already received some measure of guidance from his higher echelon about what training is required, right? In some cases, it might
ideally,
right? So in some cases, that might be, pertinent to mission analysis, like you're being tasked with this thing, therefore you need to train to this. It could be an SOP, like the Muse, right? The Muse are going to have a fairly standard skill requirement, therefore training requirement, right? In those cases where the staff NCO does receive guidance, he needs to be able to identify in his Marines, okay, where are my training deficiencies and how do I solve that deficiency? Some of those deficiencies could be, so in this case, I'll use the colloquial version of formal versus OJT rather than TCOM's definition of it. If you know of a course or training that exists that will address your deficiency, then by all means, do that, right? In some cases, that training doesn't exist, and you've got to do it yourself. What you can't do is identify a deficiency and do nothing, right? Now, the goal, the long-term goal, and you know what, man? This is one of those things that I get worked up about, honestly. I think that we have a generation and maybe two generations of Marines that are suffering from the Great Desert Wars, right? So this is
suffering.
Yes, absolutely. So what I mean by that is, we talked about this last week at the TNR working group. Do you remember the discussion about why TSOC was created?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So for those
I was the one that brought it up.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, the official justification for why TSOC was created was the 7 and 5 rotation schedule that the Marines that are graduating from Goodfellow, from the time they graduated till the time they deployed, there wasn't enough time for the radmins to train them to go down range, right? And that's what it was, right? So So the request was, hey, can you give them something, anything here at Goodfellow to get them up to speed somehow prior to deployment? Well, the problem with that is, and this ties into not just the A School Marines, but also the Marines that were already at RADBIN, or at least the senior Marines who were going there. What that created was an environment where, for lack of a better phrase, the RADBINs were they were offshoring their training requirements,
Abdicating their responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, so you could say abdicate. I mean, yeah. Painted me in the corner on that one, right? And also the OccFld, not just the RADBINs, the OccFld was outsourcing its training.
Right.
So there was a ton of contractor training happening. There's a ton of, like, hey, let's push this to the schoolhouse. And admittedly, it's not entirely fair for me to say that, because there are going to be people out there thinking, oh, well, that's not what really was going on or whatever. But so I'm not assigning malicious intent here. But that's functionally what happened. There's a certain age groups who grew up in the Marine Corps being trained by people other than Marines, right? Or maybe other than people other than their unit. So that does a couple things. The first one is that they're now conditioned to receiving training from contractors rather than their superiors, the team leaders, platoon sergeants, things like that. It also has a cascading effect where they are now less capable of conducting training themselves. So now in this model, we'll just pick a group, right? So the staff NCOs now who grew up in that environment, they were never asked to train their Marines, or at least they weren't asked often enough that it's an organic part of our culture. The group behind them, the NCOs, they're looking to their staff NCOs for that training, and in some cases received it, in some cases didn't. So now we've got a consistency problem, right? Then the youngest demographic we've got, the Lance Corporals, now that cascading problem is down to them, where it is not predictable whether or not their leadership is capable of providing training themselves. They are, in some cases, left to ask the question, well, how do we get at this by us? Because at the end, where I'm going with this is, the end state goal is we want to have Marines training Marines, right? Now, there's a category of exception to that, right? So emerging technologies will be one of those. You know what I mean? I think Sonny talked about it in his podcast, how Guy Waybright said that, when you're in active duty, you're not a professional SIGINTer because you don't have the time to dedicate towards it, right?
Yeah, I think what he was really getting at was, if I may not be quoting him perfectly, but you can't achieve your fullest potential as a SIGINTer until after you leave the Marine Corps, because you've got all these other requirements levied upon you.
Exactly, right?
And I think that's a fair statement.
Sure. So like a lot of the guys that we all know who are either retired, have gotten out, and they're doing contracting work, they have the ability to all day, every day, fuck around with gear and technology and things like that, right?
And the financial resources to be able to do so too, right?
Yeah, sure. So don't misunderstand me here. This is not a broad indictment of the individual people in our OccFld. But what we've done is we've created a situation where, and so our FIOC, are you familiar with our FIOC?
Yes.
Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with our FIOC, it is a course run by former 2600s, in some cases retired, in some cases EAS'd or medically retired even, that is teaching what I would call basic SIGINT skills. Why? Here's the question that we have to ask ourselves as an OccFld. And so some background on that course. It was I was going to say created by, but it was sponsored by, if you will, MARSOC. MARSOC identified a need for training, right? Because the Marines who were deploying to their AO were deficient in some of their proficiencies were not necessarily up to par. As an OccFld, we should be fucking insulted by that, right? It should be a shot to our pride to say, whoa, what do you mean they're not trained? And then if you take a look at it, say, oh shit, they're not trained. Well, now we got to ask ourselves why.
That
right?
a component command had to create this solution.
A component command had to say, hey, here is what we're going to require of your Marines before they deploy to us, because
they're not coming to us with the skills necessary to execute on the objective.
Right. So that is a glaring message to us saying there are things that we're not doing right. You know what I mean? So as much as I love the guys who are running that course, I want it to go away, right? The same way, I won't touch on that one because that's a little too sticky, but I want that course to go away because as long as that course exists, it means that we are still not training our own Marines properly, right? Now, I think if I remember correctly, our FIOC, I think it's Advanced Radio Frequency Intel, something like that, right? I would argue that maybe the overwhelming majority of those skills that they learn there, they are not advanced. You know what I mean? They're not.
Yeah, we came across something similar when we tried to set up the ASOC, the Advanced SIG Operators course at Camp Lejeune at SOTG.
Yeah.
And they came back and said it's not actually advanced. What you're talking about is just basic level stuff. Well, regardless,
higher level of proficiency at the basics. Yeah.
Right. They weren't teaching that at Radbin, and so we were having to get them where they needed to be.
Sure.
During the PTPs for the MEW workups.
Yeah.
But we were still Radbin bodies, just flapped out to.
Yeah. And so all of that, back to Sam's question, is if you are a staff NCO and you, so here's the real danger, honestly. The danger is, and this is what concerns me, I am less concerned about when a staff NCO identifies the deficiency and may not know right off the bat how to solve it. What concerns me most is he doesn't realize that there is a deficiency. You know what I mean? I say he, she doesn't really matter. I'm just
right.
Yeah, the royal he, if you will, right?
The royal he.
So if those staff NCOs aren't, if they're not aware that there is a deficiency, then that's a very serious, concerning problem. That is an entirely different category of remedial action. You know what I mean? Again, to Sam's point, we all at every echelon have to be engaged on this problem. You know, and I do say that it is a problem. That's not in my opinion, that is not that's not up for debate, right? Again, because that course still exists, that should tell us that there is a problem. So again, I love those guys who run that course. I love them. But I want the course to go away, because if it goes away, that means that we're starting to do something right.
There's no longer that requirement or that gap.
That's right, exactly. So if we fix it ourselves, then the course doesn't need to exist anymore. So, you know, it's tricky, because there will always be something that the Radbins, training-wise, that the Radbins or the OccFld isn't going to provide organically, and mostly that's going to be emerging technologies, like I said. But if the staff NCOs understand that there is a deficiency, then already, you know, you're somebody I have a lot of respect for once told me that a problem well defined is half solved. If we're not defining our problem well, then we've got a much bigger problem, not only a much bigger problem, but several bigger problems, right? But in this case, all you have to do is ask, right? Because I guarantee you there is someone, if you know the problem, if you've defined your problem well, someone knows the answer, you know? And it's just a matter of, A, being humble enough to say, hey, I need help. And then B, having the initiative to seek the help, you know? This shit isn't rocket science, you know? It's frustrating to me. It's frustrating to me when I hear Marines who are specifically looking for contracted solutions to training. That's the wrong answer, man. That is the wrong answer.
Yeah, I concur. I think there's certain instances where contracted solutions can facilitate training, but to be a turnkey solution, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
And I've used we used EWA through ITEP-L quite a bit. And those guys came out, they set up their gear and, generated the script, but they were generating the script that we wrote.
Yeah.
As opposed to just controlling and running the entire show.
Right.
So let's dovetail off of that a little bit.
Mhm.
I wanna kind of gauge your perception on something that I heard General Kelly say when he was down in the Dominican Republic as our guest of honor, guest speaker. In that it was a speech that he's given plenty of times, but it was a speech that I think that I needed to hear, and some of the other members of the audience needed to hear as well, in person.
Right.
And the overall message was that a very small subset of the American population have put skin in the game.
Yeah.
Over these past few years, and to that point, he says, once the buildings had collapsed, and this is about 9/11, we talked about that earlier, and the immensity of the attack began to register, most of us had no idea of what to do or where to turn.
Right.
As a nation, we were scared like we had not been scared for generations. Parents hugged their children to gain as much as to give comfort. Strangers embraced in the streets, stunned and crying on one another's shoulders, seeking solace as much as to give it.
Yeah.
Instantaneously, American patriotism soared not as the last refuge, as our national cynical class would say, but in the darkest times, Americans seek refuge in family and in country, remembering that strong men and women have always stepped forward to protect the nation when the need was dire. And it was so god-awful dire that day, and remains so today. There was, however, a small segment of America that made very different choices that day. Actions the rest of America stood in awe of on 9/11 in everyday sense. The first were our firefighters and police. Their ranks decimated that day as they ran towards, not away from, danger and certain death. They were doing what they'd sworn to do, protect and serve, and went to their graves having fulfilled their sacred oath. Then there was your armed forces, and I know I am a little biased in my opinion here, but the best of them are Marines. Most wearing the Eagle Globe and Anchor today joined the unbroken ranks of American heroes after that fateful day, not for money or promises of bonus or travel to exotic liberty ports, but for one reason and one reason alone, because of the terrible assault on our way of life by men they knew must be killed, an extremist ideology that must be destroyed. A plastic flag in their car window was not their response to the murderous assault on our country.
Yeah.
No, their response was a commitment to protect the nation, swearing an oath to their God to do so, to their deaths. When future generations ask why America is still free in the heyday of Al-Qaeda and their terrorist allies was counted in days rather than in centuries, as the extremists themselves predicted, our hometown heroes, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and Marines can say, because of me and people like me who risked all to protect millions who will never know my name. How's that make you feel?
So the short answer is it gives me chills. So if you haven't figured it out yet, I can get pretty passionate about topics like this, and like most of us, right? Don't. I mean, I'm not suggesting that I'm unique in this regard. But I think I maybe more than others tend to buy into the maybe the propaganda, more than others, right? Like to this day, when I hear the Marines hymn, I still get like the hair on my arm stand up, like it chills when I hear the Marines hymn, right? I'm one of those. I'm a true believer, right? So don't misunderstand me. I like everybody else who's been in as long as we've been in. There's a healthy bit of cynicism, right? Right.
Cynicism in all of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Having said that, though, here's an example, and I'm not making a political statement here, but I have a concealed carry permit, and I carry a gun everywhere that I'm legally allowed to carry a gun, and there's a very specific reason. Not only is it to protect like me and my family, but I believe that this ties back into protecting American lives and killing our nation's enemies. I believe that I have an obligation to our society that if and when I am called upon to defend even individual members of our society, that I'm prepared and willing to do so, right? There's something that is unique about us that is different than most of the rest of our society, and that we've been trained, right? So have you read On Killing and On Combat, right?
Grossman.
Yeah, Grossman. And he talks about, moving towards the sound of the guns and, like in Kelly's speech there. It is, not everyone will do that, right? In whatever it is about Marines, whether the Marine Corps attracts the personality or it creates the traits, most Marines are going to move towards the sound of the guns, right? And I wholeheartedly believe in that concept. You know what I mean? And this isn't like the Marine Corps specific propaganda. I'm not talking about being yut and things like that. What I mean is, like, in my soul, I believe that I personally have an obligation to our society to protect. So the oath that we all swore to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I recently asked my Marines how many of them had read the Constitution, right? And not many of them had, right? But my question to them was, you guys swore a blood oath to protect a document. Notice that in your oath, you did not swear to protect the landmass of the United States. You did not swear to protect the people of the United States. You did not swear to protect the government of the United States. You swore to protect the Constitution of the United States. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you read it, right? Because in there, it lays out the foundation of our society, right? The whole concept of what it is that we're doing. And I would phrase it this way. So the beauty of the Constitution is not the particular specifics of the law, right? The beauty of the Constitution is, rather than establishing law, it established a framework by which our government and our nation would operate, right? So what I would tell you is that if
not only operate, but that it could be changed when it was required.
Absolutely. It's a living thing, right? So Antonin Scalia, right? So what was it? Kevin, I think, mentioned having Scalia spoke at advanced course, right? So not long before he died, there was an interview, or not an interview. He had given it was either a speech or a town hall type thing that it was at Georgetown University. And so we were, at the time, the discussion, I think, was about something about transgender rights. And the particular topic in this case doesn't really matter. But I was reading the article that was summarizing this event, and one of his quotes in there stuck in my head. You either believe in democracy or you don't, or you believe in the Constitution or you don't, right? So with all of the things that are going on in our nation today, I've heard, Secretary Mattis has talked about this, right? So one of the things that our military is doing right now is providing some, we're holding the line, right? So we're maintaining a level of stability that in a world of volatility. And think what you want about that, but he's not wrong. I made the comment recently at Rabin. We have regularly scheduled PMEs every the first Friday of the month is Lance Corporal and below PME. Second Friday of the month is NCO PME. Third Friday of the month is Staff NCO PME. And at the last one, there was a discussion going on about, why we joined the Marine Corps and then why we stayed in the Marine Corps. I believe that the Marine Corps provides a service to our society that goes beyond the martial defense of our nation, right? So the values that we stand for, the things that we embody, are a net gain to the nation, right? And if you believe that, right, then your contribution to that society is greater than simply going to work and performing your tasks, right? If you really believe that, then you have an obligation to the rest of society to improve it in some way. And you can capture that in cliches and taglines. Like we've talked about, and this isn't to diminish those things, but we talk about leaving the Marine Corps better than we found it, and all those kinds of things. And the advantage to cliches and taglines is that they're relatable to wide audiences, right? The downside to those things is that if you don't internalize it and make it part of you and your character, then it's not achieving the real objective. We can get Marines to repeat ditties. That doesn't mean that they have decided to live the ditty.
You good?
I'm good.
So, one of the most, I guess, succinct ways I heard it articulated was that the mission of the Marine Corps is to win battles and make Marines.
Yeah.
And the make Marines piece is kind of touches on what it is you were referring to, in that we are ultimately transformed by our experience being in this warfighting organization, and that after 4 years or 20 or even longer, when we go back to society, we go back better than we initially started.
Yeah.
Ideally.
Yeah.
And so therein lies that I guess that inherent quid pro quo, right? I can honestly say I don't know what the fuck I would be doing if it was not for the Marine Corps.
Oh yeah.
But what about Kyle Cornett?
That's a great question. I've got no fucking clue. Well, I would. So, the arrogance in me would like to say that whatever it is, that I would be doing it well, right? But I think the real answer is I've got no idea. You know what I mean? I think the Marine Corps, so I don't necessarily believe in fate and destiny and things like that, but this was the perfect place for me to be, right? This is my role in society. I think it's important to note, though, that does not necessarily dictate my role as a man, right? So the Marine Corps is a part of my life. It's not my whole life,
Right.
Most of the guys have talked about being all in, right? I believe that my life as a father and husband, and having that healthy life at home, makes me a better Marine, and me being a good Marine makes me a better father and husband. Those things they're interconnected, and eventually, whenever it is that I am no longer an active duty Marine, the great thing is that the things that I did in the Marine Corps, the things I learned, my experiences, those won't go away. So when I'm no longer an active duty Marine, doesn't mean that now I'm going to be less of a father and husband, because it's shaped, it's molded me into what I am, right? I can tell you that prior to the Marine Corps, though, that I'm sure that many of us would have described a similar experience. I mean, I was in college and not doing well. Matter of fact, frankly, I fucking hated school, right? I never should have gone to college in the first place, right? I never should have, because it was a mistake. It's the standard thing. Your parents want you to go to college, all that kind of crap, right? I should never have gone to college. But I did, and I wasted 2.5 years of my life and money on something that I hated. I can't even describe to you how much I hated it. So funny story. So my dad was a career Army. He was a tank officer, and so when I was at school, and I finally come to the realization that. So I was working 2 jobs to try to pay for rent and tuition. And I thought to myself one day, I was like, Jesus, I hate, why am I working so hard for something that I hate, right? And so I went to the recruiter's office. As a matter of fact, I went to the Army recruiter's office. And I was talking to this guy, and he was feeding me a total line of crap, right? So he did not know that I grew up on Army bases in an Army family. He was promising me things that I just knew weren't true, right? So I was like, all right, I'm done with you. And I walked across to the Marine recruiter's office, and I said, all right, look, check it out. I'm going to join. What I need to know is what jobs are available. And he broke into the book. He broke the book out. He started going through the book. I was like, hey man, check it out. I'm going to sign up. Like, you don't need to give me the book. All I need to know is what jobs are available, right? So he gave me the little, what they got, the practice ASVAB thing.
Right. PICAT.
Yeah, whatever it is. So I took that little practice ASVAB thing, and obviously, like the rest of us, I did well on it. So he's like, oh, well, there's a lot of options, right? And at first, he was trying to push me to be an AAV guy, right? And then, so I started talking to... Yeah, that's right, yeah. So not only was my dad in the Army, but like every male in my family, like dating back to the Revolutionary War, was in the Army, right? So my my dad and my brother are West Point grads. My younger brother is he's selected for major now in the Army. Long history of service. So I was talking to a variety of people, both in my family and out. They're like, no, don't do that. That's stupid. That's a terrible idea. And honestly, I was supposed to be a linguist, and then I got to so I took the D Lab and did well on it. And then when I got to boot camp, I found this out afterwards. Actually, I went to boot camp and they gave they all those people that do the special screening. I took the code test because I told the guy that I had already taken the D Lab. He's like, oh, okay, you've already taken the D Lab, right? So I do fine on the code test, and then I find out that I'm going to Morse code school. I was like, wait, what the hell? I was supposed to go to language school, right? And then afterwards, I look back in my SRB, there is no record of ever having taken a D Lab. So whatever happened to those scores, I've got no idea. So that's how I ended up as a Morse code guy.
Can you still copy groups?
Oh, hell no. No, I can't. I mean, I'll hear like Morse code every now and then, and I could still pick it out, but I couldn't copy groups right now. Were you a code guy?
No.
So check this out. Oh, that's right. I knew that actually. I knew you were a linguist. So at Fort Huachuca, so imagine this, right? So it's a little bit different with language than it is with code. So you're copying code all day, 8 hours a day, right? So it reaches the point where guys talk about this. You'll start having dreams of Morse code. And one day I was I didn't have a TV in my barracks room, but I was in the guys across the hall, and they're in their room watching ESPN. I'm sitting there like, what the hell? I look at them like to see if they can. I'm hearing something, and I'm looking at them like seeing if they hear it too. And there's no reaction. There's nothing, right? So I'm like, do you guys hear that? They're like, what? I was like, you you don't hear that? And they're like, no, man, I don't hear anything. I was like, you guys don't hear that Morse code? They're like, oh yeah, that's on the TV. So what do you mean? I'm watching ESPN. They're like, yeah, there's some ham operator in Tucson whose frequency is real close to this channel, so we get it sometimes. But I mean, there was one of those moments where I was like, am I going fucking crazy? You know? But yeah, Morse code, man. So no, I cannot still copy groups.
So let's put you in the top game time machine.
Oh shit, here we go.
Smoke pit. You get a chance. Master Guns Cornett with Sergeant Cornett.
Yeah.
You get 2 hours. What do you tell him?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, I've heard you ask the other guys this question, and every time you ask them, I thought I was asking myself what the answer would be. You know, man, that's a very tough question. Not because there's nothing I would tell him, but because there's so much I would tell him, right? For one thing, I'd tell him to quit being such a fucking smartass. Aside from that, I mean, at the risk of sounding like a complete and total nerd, I'd start telling him all the things that he should have been learning on his own, but wasn't. You know, technical skills, and frankly, a lot of life skills too. I mean, Christ, like most of us, I was a fucking mess as a sergeant. You know, I was. I don't know that my priorities back then were what they are now. Although, you know, I would also say that a lot of that is the natural maturation of a person. You know what I mean? And so I don't know that Sergeant Cornett would have been receptive to Master Guns Cornett. You know, that's probably part of just growing up. You know what I mean?
That's interesting. So he wouldn't have been receptive?
Yeah, I mean, so I think back to when I was a sergeant, and even back then, it's not that I thought I knew everything, but my perspective was different, right? So I was very concerned with the now. I was very concerned with, you know, what's the next mission? What's the next task? What's this? But I was doing very little forecasting. You know what I mean? I wasn't anticipating, you know, 3 or 4 missions from now, and how do I prepare for that? And when I use the term mission, I'm not just talking about work. I'm also talking about life, right? I mean, I made mistakes in my personal life. I made mistakes in my professional life, but. So when I say that, I don't know that I would have been receptive. Like, I don't necessarily think that I would have, you know, said, this guy doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. I don't know that it would have been real to me. You know what I mean? Like, you know, your oldest is 16, right? When you talk to him about, you know, life lessons, I'm sure that he's listening to you, but I don't know that. I'm sure that you see that he doesn't yet have the perspective or the context to understand exactly what that will mean for him in the long run, right?
He can't completely grasp it, but man, that boy surprises the shit out of me all the time, Kyle.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean, he's you know, I was talking about this with my mom over Mother's Day. I had the opportunity to go home and talk to my mom and my stepmom, and they're obviously asking. They haven't seen the boys in almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
And Enrique in particular has grown by leaps and bounds. There's a level of maturity there that I wish I would have had it at 16.
Right.
A level of tenacity as it pertains to his academic and extracurricular pursuits that I was running around with a less than ideal crowd, and you know, engaged in activities that you know I'd be embarrassed to air.
Sure.
You know, on this platform, but yeah, I mean, you're right. He doesn't get it completely, but he gets so much more than I would have at 16.
Well, you know, so as you were describing that, one of the things I was just thinking about is, so it's kind of a difficult concept to articulate, right? So when you say that he grasps it, but may not have it like all the way yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is an element of growing up that you have to experience firsthand. You know, there's a part of that, and that if you don't experience that here's it may not be the best example. Here's an example. Before you had kids, right? I'm sure people were telling you, like, while your wife was pregnant, I'm sure people were telling you, like, oh, it's going to change your life, and you know, this kind of stuff. And you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I know it's going to change my life. I'm about to have a kid. You know what I mean? But until it happens, you don't fully grasp the magnitude of what just happened, right?
Right.
The first time you hold your kid, so I know you didn't ask the question, but I think this highlights the point. So when my oldest was born, and they put her in my hands, and I, you know, cut the cord and all that stuff, I very vividly remember having two very distinct thoughts, right? And I mean, the internal monologue was on full blast. My first thought was, this is fucking awesome. And my second thought was, everything just changed, you know?
Right.
You know, so it's similar to that in the sense that, like, if I could go back and talk to Sergeant Cornett, I would have, you know, many discussions about like a lot of things, about life, about you know, about work, about all that kind of stuff. And I probably would have, you know, listened and participated in the conversation, but I don't know that it would have really made sense to me, you know. And obviously that's not. That is a very difficult thing for anyone to have someone tell you who has experienced something what it's like to experience something without having done it yourself. You know, like, it could be anything, whether we're talking about our junior Marines in combat or any of that stuff. It's you can describe it, but you can't make them feel it. You know, it's real when you feel it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So, I think this is what, episode 12?
I'll go with that.
13? And I met you for the first time in John's room.
Yeah.
And one of the first things you said to me is, I love the podcast.
Yeah.
What do you love about it? And what were your initial reactions? And what does it mean to have this platform to communicate to the community in this fashion? And what could we be doing better?
Yeah, so I first found out about it. So Sonny called me after you guys did his, and when he explained to me, you know, what the concept behind it was, I was like, oh yeah, that's awesome, right? So the letting the junior Marines be a fly on the wall, you know, kind of thing for you know, conversation between some of the older guys. I was like, oh, that's awesome, right? Because I remember as a junior Marine myself, I used to, at every chance I would get, when grown folks were talking, I was listening, right? I didn't always understand, and wasn't always able to apply what they were talking about, but I was absorbing, you know. And this is a fantastic venue for young Marines to get a variety of perspectives on careers, on life, and all that kind of stuff. And you know, it's. I mean, in general, it's just a good thing that. Well, and then on top of that, so like, for example, you know, when we talk about leadership and spheres of influence, right? A sergeant has a certain sphere of influence. A master gunnery sergeant has a certain sphere of influence. But what you've done here is you have expanded that sphere of influence for all of us, right? So the guys who know Sonny. The guys who don't. Now you got a whole, you know, group of Marines who may not ever meet him, but they got the opportunity to listen to his experience, his insights, and the same true is for everyone else that you've interviewed, right? And I mean, that's invaluable. You know what I mean? In terms of like how to improve, that's a fucking good question, and I don't know that I have an answer. I frankly, I don't know that I have a suggestion for you, because I think what you're doing right now is great, right? Yeah, I don't think I have a critique. You know what I mean? I think this forum is outstanding. Like, think back, man. Think back, like some of the senior dudes when you were a young Marine. Like, what would you have given to have, like the ability to have a real man talk with them and listen to them talk about like all these subjects? You know what I mean?
Yes. So all these subjects, I'd have given a testicle, right?
Yeah.
But I did have real man talks with guys like Master Guns Hartman, Master Guns Owen, Master Guns Stevens.
Sure.
Multiple, ops chiefs at 2nd Radio Battalion at a very formative time in my career when I was a sergeant slash staff sergeant.
Yeah.
And I think that prepared me in a lot of ways. Not all the Marines at the battalion had access to that.
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate in that regard, and I understood that even then, to have that, I guess, placement access.
Yeah.
From a human perspective. And I think a little bit of it was, they saw a young, hard charger that was going full bore, and sometimes they had to throttle me back. Sometimes they had to push me a little.
Sure.
To get me outside of my comfort zone. But, I think that what I'm trying to do here is in payment.
Oh yeah.
To that.
Yeah. That's. I mean, it's funny as you were just talking about that. I was thinking back to my first tour at Radio Battalion. I can tell you who my sergeants major were. I don't think I could. No, I know I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you who any of the master guns were.
Really?
Yeah. For real. So, and back then there were two, right? So there was there was the ops chief, and there was the I think they were called the P&R chief back then. And that only changed recently, frankly. But I couldn't tell you who they were. Not one of them. And matter of fact, now that I think about it, I think the only master sergeant that I could name was Tom Dean, who was my platoon sergeant. It was an anomaly, right? So the RP platoon sergeant for a while was a master sergeant, and there was there's circumstance behind that, but I don't know that I could name another master sergeant from the battalion. Now, part of that is me, right? In my little insular world there in RP, but that's also probably a statement about some of the things that we were not doing as an OccFld back then, right? And some of it was, I'm sure, personality dependent. So the fact that I can't name them means that, like, I can't, indict them for something, because for all I know, those guys were doing plenty of mentoring with other people. It just wasn't me, right?
Right.
But like, I do think that as senior leaders, we have a responsibility to these young Marines. One of the things, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna get real for a second. So I spent 11 years at MARSOC, right? And when Willie told me that I had orders to 2nd Radio Battalion, I was not looking forward to it. Now, probably not for the reason that people might think, though, right? So, like, I'm a 2nd Radbin alumni, so it wasn't that like, this place sucks. It wasn't any of that stuff. I knew that there were some things that were some very specific things that were going on there that I wasn't really a fan of, right? And in my head, I was like, I don't know if I'll be able to influence this or not. We'll see, kind of thing. But when I checked in, all those concerns rapidly went away for a specific reason. Because and I've told my Marines this on a number of occasions, probably to the point where they're thinking, all right, okay, Cornett, shut up, right? But the Marines have made it. This tour, it's been less than a year. So I checked in last July. I'll be leaving June 1st. The Marines have made this tour incredibly fun for me, because here's what I'll tell you: these young Marines, all of them, they want to be good at their jobs, right? And if if we are not showing them how to do that, then that's on us. You know, they want to be good at their jobs. You know, I won't call them out by name because I don't want to either embarrass them or cause issue another way. When I checked in, somebody had pointed out this Marine to me and said, you know, he's kind of a non-performer kind of thing. And I had a conversation with him because I wanted to gauge for myself. You know, Sonny had talked, all the guys had talked about it, right? So if somebody tells you, you know, hey, this guy's good, this guy's crap, depending on who it is, you're either going to be bought in, you know, or
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so now in this case, the person that was telling me this is not one of those people, right? Like, not one of those people whose opinion I trusted immediately, right? So I was like, okay, now I got to go investigate. So I went and talked to this Marine, had a couple of conversations with him. I was thinking to myself, I'm not getting the same vibe that guy did. So I'm going to go the opposite direction. Rather than reduce the number of things I wanted him to do, we made him a team leader. And this kid's been crushing it. You know what I mean? Crushing it. Volunteering for additional training, volunteering for additional responsibility. And it's fucking awesome to watch it. You know what I mean?
Right.
These
Sometimes they just need a chance.
Yeah. And, I mean, these Marines are starving for the opportunity to excel, and we have to provide it, you know, and we have to reinforce in their minds. One of my, I mentioned a while ago about ditties and taglines and all that kind of stuff, but one of my taglines is that if you pursue excellence in everything that you do, good things will happen, right? It may not always be the thing that you want to happen, but if you pursue excellence in everything that you do, good things will happen, you know? So, I mean, to go down the cheesy Marine Corps bloom where you're planted thing, in my career, so I don't know about you, but in my career, I've only gotten one set of orders that I asked for. One.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. One. Now, I have no complaints about that, right? In retrospect, I don't.
Actually, I would say it happened to me twice, back to back.
Okay. So
Dom Rep, San Antonio.
Yeah. Now I'm also, that's also, you know, I'm making the argument a little bit unfairly maybe because when I first went to MARSOC, Crawdaddy called me up and he said, hey, you want to come be on my team? I was like, hell yeah, I'll come be on your team. Actually, I didn't say hell yeah because I know it's Crawdaddy, right?
Right.
I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll come be on your team. And and he was at Lejeune at the time. And so I expected to get orders cut to Camp Lejeune. And
that wasn't his first deployment at MARSOC, was it?
It was, yeah. So at that point, nobody had deployed from MARSOC. He was still building his first team. So he called me up and asked me if I wanted to be on his team. I'm like, absolutely, yeah, let's do this, right? And this was right at that time period where Russman and Joe Black were turning over as monitor. And so not only did I not get orders to Lejeune, I did get orders to MARSOC. I didn't get orders to Lejeune, but I got orders to Pendleton. And I think I had like 2 weeks to execute orders from DC to Pendleton, right? So I was a single sergeant, so it didn't really matter much. I just packed up all my shit in a truck and a U-Haul and drove across the country. But it was a shock because what that meant was not only was I not going to be on Crawdaddy's team, I was now the first team leader on the West Coast. So that whole mental dynamic was a rapidly shifting thing, right?
Careful what you ask for.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because Crawdaddy will tell you the same thing, man. Back then, you know, MARSOC was the Wild West, brother. I mean, what I mean by that is our training plan, our TEEP, was on Sunday nights. Crawdaddy and I would be on the phone going, hey, what are you doing this week? Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. We're going to do that too, right? Or, hey, what are you doing? Like, oh, yeah, crap, I forgot about that. You know, like that kind of thing. So at that time, the people directing the entirety of the SIGINT training in MARSOC were me and Crawdaddy. You know what I mean? It was I won't say overwhelming. It was, I understood the magnitude of what was going on, right? And all I could think to myself was, don't fuck this up, right? The repercussions are beyond you. They're beyond this team. Don't fuck this up. You know what I mean? So it was a very interesting time period because I understood what the repercussions would be if we screwed it up. You know, as a staff sergeant, I mean, I was about to say junior staff sergeant, but that's not entirely true. I wasn't junior staff sergeant, but as a staff sergeant, that was I realized very quickly that I was now playing with the big boys, and there were people looking at me to either fail or succeed, and I had to perform. You know.
So let's try this question.
Okay.
I got something new for you, for your new billet. Staff Sergeant Castro walks into the room. He just got orders. He's in his office.
Yeah.
What do you say to me during that check-in process?
So you'll hear me, the longer you know me, you'll hear me say this a lot. And I've already talked about it tonight, that these Marines have to understand that their job is to protect American lives and kill our nation's enemies. Both of those things are incredibly important. Both of those things require the physical, mental, and moral excellence to be able to perform those duties, and not just perform the duties, but perform the duties and maintain those values. You know what I'm saying? There's a difference, right? I would also tell you that your job as an instructor is not to be their friend. You're not precluded from being their friend in the long run, but that's not your job. Your job is to train them. Sometimes training them is uncomfortable for them, and sometimes it's uncomfortable for you. But if you lose sight of what the goal is, then you're wrong, right? We have a responsibility to prepare these Marines for the mental and physical rigors of combat, and to have the technical and tactical proficiencies that go along with that. We can never, ever forget that. It's too important.
And with that, we're out.